Welcome to the third annual Vulnerable Adult Abuse and Awareness Resource Fair. This is the first time we've offered this fair here in Southeast Alaska, and it's the first time that we've actually offered a regional-wide event. Today we actually have multiple communities throughout Southeast Alaska that are here through the Alaska OWL project, and so I'd also like to welcome via the video conference equipment over here, Cordova, Haines, Hoonah, Sitka, Wrangell, and Ketchikan. So thank you all for coming and sharing with this ever-growing event. September was proclaimed by Governor Parnell as the Vulnerable Adult Abuse Awareness Month. We have 3 events happening throughout the state in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and here in Juneau. With the intent to highlight issues surrounding the vulnerable adults in Alaska and the resources to help protect them. First, I'd like to thank the Division of Senior and Disability Services Director Dwayne Myers and Deputy Director John Sherwood for supporting us with this event. I would also like to thank all of the vendors, the Commission on Aging, the Governor's Office, and all the staff, supervisors, and managers of Adult Protective Services who have allowed to make this event happen and be a success. We'd like to especially thank Salmon Creek LLC and Breyer and Associates for allowing us with the use of the Mendenhall Mall, and all of the libraries for the use of the conference rooms to be able to make this a region-wide event. And I want to make a special thank you to the Mendenhall Library for helping us coordinate with the Alaska OWL system. We at Adult Protective Services work daily to protect and provide safety to vulnerable adults in Alaska. A vulnerable adult, is a person who is 18 years or older who, because of a physical or mental impairment, either cannot protect themselves or who cannot seek protection for themselves. Nationally, abuse of vulnerable adults is on the rise. The National Center of Elder Abuse estimates that the number of cases of abuse of vulnerable adults continues to rise at an alarming rate. 50% of people with dementia who experience some kind of abuse in their lifetime prevalence of any type of abuse or interpersonal violence against women with a disability was found to be about 90%, and men were at 86%. Elders who experience abuse have a 300% higher risk of death when compared to those who have not been abused. In Alaska, we receive over 5,000 reports of harm a year. Self-neglect allegations are among the highest, and financial exploitation is second. And one study estimates that in 1 in 14 cases of elder abuse ever comes to the attention of authority, either Adult Protective Services or the police. So we all need to be aware of the growing problems with abuse against our elders and our vulnerable adults, and how to report it and how to protect them. But this morning I also wanted to be able to introduce you to Senior and Disability Deputy Director John Sherwood, and we actually have a wonderful award that we want to be able to provide.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I get into handing out the award, I just wanted to take a moment and recognize Barbara Dick with the Protective Services, who kind of wrangles all of the resource fairs, and especially Tanya, who's just done such a great job with putting this one together, first time in this community and first regional fair. I think it's just typical of the dedication of our APS staff, and we really appreciate them both. But I'm really happy to be here to give out the 2014 Community Commitment Award. Can Marianne Mills, Program Director for Southeast Senior Services, please come up? Southeast Senior Services is a division of Catholic Community Services. It has two programs that we would like to honor today: Care Coordination Services and the Gatekeeper Program. These teams of professionals serve elders throughout Southeast Alaska in the communities of Juneau, Hoonah, Angoon, Yakutat, Ketchikan, Saxman, Prince of Wales, and Metlakatla. Did I leave any out? Okay. Care Coordination Services are offered to elders 60 and older who are frail, at risk, or suffer from memory problems, physical disabilities, medical problems, or dementia-related disorders. They work with families, elders, and friends to assess and identify the elder's needs, plan and arrange for services, and to monitor those services in order to help support the elders to live with dignity and as independently as possible. The Gatekeeper Program provides education to the community to help community members such as apartment managers, mail carriers, neighbors, bank tellers, police officers, and others to identify changes in elders, such as confusion or memory loss, changes in appearance, home disrepair, or lacking financial activities like paying bills or making monthly deposits. The program also offers home visits, information, and referral services to elders 60 years and older. Adult Protective Services has worked closely with these two programs in a variety of ways. In rural settings, the Gatekeeper staff has acted as rural designees for APS to assist in providing a face-to-face contact with elders when an APS worker is not available to provide an immediate presence in the community. They've also been very successful in accompanying the APS worker to speak with elders in a culturally appropriate manner about a report that APS has received. The relationship with their individual communities has been extremely valuable in improving the protection of elders from abuse. The Gatekeeper and care coordinators, in conjunction with APS, have met with individuals and families to provide such assistance as education, referral for community services, establishment of alternative decision makers, and coordinating safety plans for long-term care in-home supports. The Gatekeeper Program and Care Coordination Programs are committed to making a change in Southeast Alaskan communities and are genuinely caring professionals who are dedicated to helping elders remain safe, free from harm, and in their own communities. It is my great pleasure to present this award to Southeast Senior Services.
I want to recognize the key staff in those programs right now. And we have with us Eileen Hosey, our Care Coordination Supervisor. Rick Hamby is a member of her staff. Melissa Showers is the other member here, and Tony Malott. And then down in Ketchikan, Bernice Metcalf is our super duper care coordinator, and she's busy right now at attending a special veterans event there, as is Katie Duhay-Lungsod, who is our Gatekeeper manager in Ketchikan. They're both at the veterans event, so I'm sorry they're not able to view this today, but we'll share your thoughts with them. And then Jocelyn Ferrer is, she heads up our Gatekeeper program in Juneau, and she's leading a Tai Chi class right now, so she couldn't be here. Tai Chi for seniors. So anyway, I hope I didn't leave anybody out, but thank you so much for the honor, and thank you to my wonderful staff for all their work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Marianne. So today we have 30 vendors lining the hallway of the mall, and they are offering information about services, programs for such needs as in-home care, benefits, developmental disability services, legal aid, Pioneer Home, assistive devices and products, reporting concerns, and a variety of other types of vendors as well. We have 4 presentations. We will open this morning with 2 presentations by Ms. Holly Handler. At first at 10:45, she will be discussing qualifying for Medicaid. which is the process of using and obtaining a Miller's Trust. And then Ms. Handler will also speak at 11:45 a.m. about establishing an alternative decision maker and the differences between a power of attorney and guardianship. Then at 12:45, Dan Austin from St. Vincent de Paul will come and speak to us about homelessness in Southeast Alaska. And then finally at 1:45 this afternoon, we'll have a panel discussion about the eligibility and availability of services and placement here in Southeast Alaska. We're going to take at least 15-minute breaks in between presentations, so folks can be able to get up and stretch and be able to get out and mingle with the bingangers and get food and those kinds of things. So, but I wanted to be able to thank everybody for coming this morning and joining with us. And we'll go ahead and get started here in about 20 minutes with our first speaker, Ms. Hanlon. Thank you. So I wanted to be able to get started, though, with our next presentation. So I want to introduce Holly Handler. She has served as the supervising attorney for Southeast Alaska offices of Alaska Legal Services Corporation since 2006. She represents low-income and elderly clients in housing, healthcare, public benefits, and in domestic relation cases. In addition, she serves as a counsel for Alaska Native tribes and tribal organizations in matters regarding tribal sovereignty and child protection. And also Alaska Legal Services Corporation. Holly was a public defender in Anchorage, Palmer, Bethel, and New York City. And she, in 1999, graduated from the Harvard Law School. So please give a warm welcome for Ms. Holly Handler.
All right, thank you, Tanya, and thanks to the Division of Senior and Disability Services, Adult Protective Services. And since Tanya is too modest to bring, toot her own horn, I just wanted to give a special thanks to Tanya, not just for the huge amount of work that went into organizing this event and getting everybody lined up today, but all year long, day in and day out, Tanya Muldoon is the one person in Southeast Alaska who's taking all these reports of harm for vulnerable adults and going to houses and meeting with people and dealing with really challenging family situations and really tough cases. And she's doing that all on her own. So thanks to Tanya for just and thanks to all of you who we work with all the time. Our agencies, especially in Southeast Alaska, are really small agencies that have a few people on staff, and we all depend on each other to provide services. One of the really nice things about Southeast Senior Services and the Gatekeeper program that was recognized this morning is that Southeast Senior Services does a really good job of connecting people to the whole umbrella of services that they need. So a lot of us work together every day in trying to work with families and make sure that all their needs are taken care of, not just legal needs, but social and emotional and physical needs. So it's a really nice community to work in, and just thanks to all of you who do this work all the time. So for those of you who aren't familiar with legal services, we've been around for a while. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and Tanya mentioned some of the work that we do. We're very small. There's myself and another attorney and our paralegal in Ketchikan. And between the three of us, we serve all the communities in Southeast Alaska. And people apply for our services. We have a front and back application that's at the back of the room and at our resource table. And I think it's at the other communities that Tanya distributed materials to. And people apply for our services. We screen to make sure we don't have any conflicts of interest and that applicants meet our financial guidelines. We serve low-income residents using the federal poverty guidelines measures. And then we also have a special grant from the state of Alaska where we can serve seniors over 60 who are just above our income and resource guidelines but can't afford to hire a private attorney. So that grant helps us fill a gap for seniors who are in that middle class conundrum of not being poor enough to meet poverty programs, but not being quite rich enough to afford the services of a fancy private lawyer. So people apply for our services, and then beyond that, we meet every week to talk about new applications. We can't help everybody that applies for our services. We just don't have the staff. With 2 attorneys and a paralegal, the demand for civil legal aid is really huge. There is no right to counsel in civil cases like there is in criminal cases. So we're able to meet between 50 and 60% of the demand. One thing that we always help with, though, and we never turn down an application for, is doing Medicaid trusts, which is the topic of conversation here today. And what I'd like to do is hopefully not speak for the full hour. I maybe have about 20 minutes of information to give, and then I'll open it up for questions. And so I think there's an audio link as well. So people in the other communities, if you raise your hand when I'm done and open it up for questions, we can use the link to get questions there, and I can try to answer them here. And for people asking questions here, I'll repeat the question and answer it so that hopefully everybody can hear. And if there's a real problem hearing, just wave your arms so we know there's a problem in the other communities. So before I talk about Medicaid income trusts, I want to step back a little bit and talk about what Medicaid is and why people need it, and how people go about getting qualified for Medicaid. And apologies in advance to all the people here who know more about this subject than I do. I'm just going to try to give a little bit of an overview. So Medicaid is a federal program for disabled individuals who are low income and low asset. It's easy to confuse Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is the program available to everybody 65 and over, regardless of income and regardless of need. So Medicare is available to everybody over 65. Medicaid is only limited to low-income disabled. There's also some other categories of Medicaid, like family Medicaid and pregnancy, but I'm really going to focus on this today on seniors who usually qualify for the older Alaskans Medicaid, which is focused on disability. So it's a state and federal partnership. The money comes from both sources, and the group that administers Medicaid in Alaska is the state of Alaska within the Department of Health and Social Services. And to qualify for Medicaid in Alaska, you have to meet a certain low level of income. So that's what's coming in every month in terms of salary or Social Security or pension. And you also have to be low resource, which is also low asset, meaning other than your home and your car and some other essential items, you have to be below a certain income limit. And it changes depending on whether you're a single person or a couple and what kind of Medicaid you're trying to qualify for, whether it's regular Medicaid or nursing home Medicaid or home and community-based Medicaid. But it's a low asset ceiling and a low income ceiling because our Medicaid program is very limited. Other states have expanded their Medicaid to include somewhat higher levels of income and resources so that people who fit into the middle class group have an option for insurance when they can't afford private insurance. Alaska did not opt into the Medicaid expansion, so we're really looking at a very small group of low income, low asset disabled individuals who will qualify for the Medicaid program. So why might people who are aging think about Medicaid? The main reason that we come across when we're talking with clients is long-term care. Long-term care is something that it's estimated 70% of us will need. And long-term care is this umbrella that covers all sorts of things from nursing home care to in-home nursing to any type of care that's going to be needed to take care of a long-term disability. Long-term care costs a lot of money. Alaska has the highest nursing home care costs in the United States, and it's not just more expensive than everybody else, it's way more expensive than everybody else. We're like almost twice the price of most other states in the country. Because the cost of real estate and low population, a whole variety of factors make long-term care in Alaska exorbitantly expensive. And it's expensive across the board. It's expensive whether you're looking at a nursing home, whether you're looking at in-home nursing care or personal services care or assisted living care. Whatever choice you make, it's going to be expensive. So people who are starting to look at long-term care needs and what their options are, think to themselves, first off, well, how is this going to get paid for? I don't have this money. And the answer is simple. If you don't have insurance, and if you don't have the assets to pay for it, savings or other resources that you can liquidate, it's not going to get paid for unless you use this safety net program of Medicaid. Some people tell us, I hear that if I need to get long-term care, the government's going to force me to sell my house and go on Medicaid. And it's a myth, because the government would prefer that you not get on Medicaid. It's very expensive. But Medicaid is available as a resource because there's so few other resources out there. Very few people have the cash on hand to pay out of pocket for long-term care. And very few people have insurance that covers it. If you've fallen asleep so far, wake up for this one fact, which is that Medicare does not cover most long-term care needs. So the Medicare program that people over 65 are qualified for has very limited benefits for long-term care. In certain instances, they'll cover up to about 100 days of care, and then it stops. There's all sorts of complicated rules about how it can restart or what other exceptions there are, but for the most part, people who need extended long-term care will not be able to get it through Medicare. Some people have purchased the state health plans, the bronze, silver, and gold plans. There are some long-term care benefits provided in that, but again, those can be very limited as well. So if you have those plans and you've assumed all along that those plans will take care of your long-term care needs, you should get on the phone with Retirement Benefits and get the details about what exactly it covers and what it doesn't cover. Even fewer people have purchased private health insurance that covers long-term care benefits. There's some plans that are just called long-term care plans. Very, very few people have them. And that's because of the expense. I don't have figures for this year. In 2008, premiums for a married couple in their 60s cost about $3,000 per year. And those plans can vary in terms of, after you pay the premium, how much will actually be covered, how many co-pays there are, what services are excluded. The state of Alaska Division of Insurance used to put out a really great guide called Long-Term Care Insurance Consumer Guide. The last one I've seen available is from 2007, so it's not up to date. But this is available on the internet, and you can download it for free on the internet. And even though some of the figures and rules are out of date from 2007, especially the cost figures that are quoted in here, it does give a consumer guide to purchasing long-term care insurance and what the options are and what questions to ask if you're shopping around for long-term care benefits, to compare and contrast as you're looking at your options. So for those people who don't have a pile of money sitting in the bank, they don't have resources they can liquidate to pay for long-term care out of pocket, there's basically three options. Purchasing a long-term care plan, which can be prohibitively expensive. Using the Medicaid safety net and qualifying under the poverty guidelines for that safety net, or just not having it, is always an option. People sometimes just choose to not get care. And unfortunately, a lot of those people who make those choices end up in Tanya Muldoon's desk and on her caseload. So the choices are tough. It's a complicated system. But at some point along the way, every one of us will make that choice, whether it's by default or whether it's by conscious planning. So if you take one thing away, besides the fact that Medicare doesn't cover most long-term care, take away the fact that a decision has to be made at some point. And it's better to make that decision in consultation with professionals, with your doctor, with your family, with your kids, with time to do the research, than to make it in a crisis or have your kids make it in a crisis. Because most of us will need it, and most of us are going to have to figure out a way to deal with it. So, I'm not going to talk at length about private insurance options for long-term care. You can call the division insurance, you can call the long-term care ombudsman, you can call private insurers and get information. There's quite a bit of information out there. AARP is very involved in long-term care costs. They're doing a lot of research, and they've got a lot of resources available. So I'm not going to talk about that piece. And Tani can talk about the do-nothing piece and what happens when people don't have care. I'm going to talk about Medicaid. So Medicaid, as I mentioned, isn't available for everybody. We don't have universal health care. We don't have expanded Medicaid. We only have Medicaid for people who meet certain poverty guidelines. So, to meet those poverty guidelines, you're going to have to look at two things: monthly income and total resources. So monthly income is things like pension benefits, Social Security, disability, Social Security, retirement. When you apply for Medicaid at Department of Public Assistance, they're going to get the information from your doctor and about your medical needs to make sure that you're disabled and qualify under all the medical rules. They're going to take your income information to make sure you qualify for income. And then they're going to ask information about everything you own. How much money is in your bank? How much land do you own? Do you own stocks and bonds? You're going to have to list everything out. You're going to have to be complete about it. So assuming that you've met the definition for disability and that you can qualify for Medicaid just with your medical needs, the next thing to look at is whether you qualify for income and whether you qualify for assets. If somebody owns too much stuff to qualify for Medicaid, Medicaid will talk to you about a couple options. That's either spending down what you own, either on your medical care, your long-term care needs, or on other needs that you have. Or they're going to talk to you about the options for putting some of your assets into trust. The legal rules for putting your assets into trust are very complicated. We do not do those at legal services. We refer those cases out to private attorneys who specialize in Medicaid asset trusts. And those can be things like special needs trust and pooled trust. And for us, what we've decided is the rules are so complicated. They should really be done by somebody who specializes it and can also give advice about estate planning and financial advice and tax advice, because all those issues are implicated when you're talking about setting up an asset trust. The other thing is that you can use, if you need an asset trust, you likely have assets that you can use to pay a private attorney. And we're the stopgap for people who really can't afford a private attorney. We do income trusts, and these are a type of application that we almost never turn down. And an income trust is a tool for somebody who would otherwise qualify for Medicaid, except that they're a little bit over the income limit. And we're really lucky in Alaska that we can use trusts to qualify for Medicaid, because not all states have that option. In some states, if you're over income, that's it. Medicaid is not an option, and there is nothing you can do. And then you're stuck looking at either the private long-term care insurance option or the no care option, which are both pretty poor options. So in Alaska, the trust can be cumbersome, but at least we can do them. And the way the trust works is that the trust is basically a separate bank account run by a trustee, which is somebody other than yourself. And the extra money coming in every month that's making you over income can go into the special trust account. It's siphoned away from your regular income, and it's managed by somebody else, so it no longer counts as your income. You don't necessarily lose that income forever. A trustee can use trust funds to purchase things for your benefit that aren't food and shelter. So it's money that your trustee can use for you for things other than your rent and your groceries. So you don't necessarily lose it, but it becomes subject to certain strict spending rules. So it can be a bit cumbersome to use, but at least it is a way for somebody who's over income to qualify. And just as an example, a few years ago, Social Security benefits went up just a very tiny bit because of cost of living increases. So people ended up $20 or $10 or $1 over the Medicaid income limit. So these are people who desperately depend on Medicaid benefits and were just slightly over the income limit. In other states, they would have been out of luck and they would have no longer qualified for that medical care. In Alaska, they can set up a trust account to siphon off that extra $10, $20, or $1 a month to qualify for Medicaid. And that's really, really worth it for those people who depend on benefits. There's no set limit for how much extra income can go into a trust every month. So it's not like Medicaid trusts are only available if you're $20 over income, but there's just diminishing returns. The more over income you are for Medicaid, the less it makes sense to put in $1,000 or more than $1,000 every month into a trust when there's other options that are going to be available, because with that kind of excess income you probably could afford some sort of private insurance plan or pay out of pocket. So what legal services does when somebody applies to us, it's usually because they've applied for Medicaid. Medicaid has said you're over income for the Medicaid program, but you can see Alaska Legal Services about setting up a trust. They'll take that letter, they'll fill out an application for us, and we'll sit down and talk about how the trust works, whether it's something that they want to do, and then we'll draw the trust document itself. We'll draw up a court registration form, and we'll draw up instructions for the bank, and we'll draw up instructions for the trustee about how they set up the special account and how they're going to manage it every month. So it's about, I'd say, a few days of work to get the paperwork done, set up the account, give the paperwork to public assistance, and then every month there's going to be some work involved once the money comes in, distributing it and spending it. Some people are able to set up automatic transfers with the bank so that the money comes in and the bank automatically transfers money from one account to another, and at the end of the year the trustee will spend those funds down. So depending on how much is going into the trust account, it can be managed more or less simply. Any questions so far before I go on? Any questions in Juneau? Any questions in Ketchikan or other communities on the OWL?
What are the options for someone who doesn't have someone who they could rely on to be a trustee?
All right, that's a good question. So one of the requirements of a trust is having this trustee to manage it, somebody that's not you, somebody who's going to be in control. So most people have, they can have a spouse be their trustee. They can have an adult son or daughter be the trustee. They could have a friend be the trustee if it's a friend they can trust. It gets complicated if somebody is living alone and basically doesn't have a trustworthy friend or trustworthy family member. So that gets complicated. If somebody has a public guardian, meaning that they have lost the capacity to manage their own affairs and they have have somebody from the Office of Public Advocacy appointed to be their legal guardian, or if they've lost their capacity to manage their own finances and they've been appointed the public guardian to serve as their conservator to manage their finances, the public guardian could also be their Medicaid trustee, but only if they're already serving as their public guardian or conservator. There are, in Alaska, a few private payee services. So Social Security will sometimes appoint a representative payee to get somebody's Social Security check, pay their bills, and then give the person the rest of their money or help manage the rest of their funds. So a lot of those representative payee companies will also serve as a Medicaid trustee. And that's the option that we've used in most of our cases here in Southeast. Are there's 2 or 3 payee services that are for-profit companies that operate in the Southeast communities. For some people that works just fine. Other people it doesn't work very well, especially if they are not in the same community with the payee. There can be some pretty challenging communication issues. The trustee you choose doesn't necessarily have to be the trustee for life. You can always change the trustee through a request with the court, working with our office, but it does take some time to do. Occasionally there'll be a trustee who just leaves town or stops answering the person's phone calls, and in that case it really freezes the account so the person can have difficulty accessing their funds. Some people ask about how much oversight over the trust is there, and so public assistance, there's no regular accounting that's done or monthly reporting that has to be done. But public assistance will sit down with the trustee once a year and look at the accounts and look at what's being spent and review the receipts and make sure that nothing's being spent on food or shelter that would be against the trust rules. Sometimes that annual review by public assistance raises some red flags, and sometimes adult protective services can be called if it appears that the trustee has been using the funds for himself or herself, or just isn't managing the account at all. So that 1-year checkup is at least some kind of stopgap measure to try to ensure some protection for the person using the trust. The last thing I was going to mention is a question that comes up with the trust, which is what happens if the person who needs the trust, who needs to go into long-term care, doesn't have the ability to make those decisions anymore. So if a person has Alzheimer's or dementia and can't set up the trust, what we will do is work with a person's power of attorney if they've assigned a power of attorney to help them with their affairs, and the power of attorney can sign a trust document on behalf of the person that they're the agent for. So we can work with powers of attorney. If somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia hasn't set up a power of attorney and they can't set up the trust on their own because they lack capacity, at that point we have to call Tanya Muldoon and Adult Protective Services and say we have a vulnerable adult who needs to get on Medicaid to cover long-term care. They have no other options and their health or their life depends on getting this care. Then we have to wait for the court process for a legal guardian to be appointed, and then we'll work with a legal guardian to set up the trust for that person. It's not a good emergency situation to be in. So again, thinking about what your needs might be in the future, what the needs of the person you're caring for might be in the future. Think about that now. Think about what these limited options are. There is planning that people can do in terms of thinking about what the Medicaid limits are and how they may be able to qualify for that, or how they don't want to deal with all these federal government rules and regulations and they prefer to get private insurance, how much that's going to cost and what they have to set aside now. Planning well in advance of a crisis is going to be something that ends up in better care, and a lot less stress for families and caregivers, you know, the sons and daughters who, you know, have to fly up from out of state or have to, you know, come in when there's an emergency. Setting that up in advance really saves a lot of heartache and will probably result in healthier seniors in our community. Okay, Tanya.
I have a question. Holly, I know you're based here in Juneau, and Deborah Mullen is based over in Ketchikan. We have a lot of communities that are connected with us today. Could you speak just briefly to how Alaska Legal Services may work with folks who are in Cordova, Sitka, and Wrangell, over in Hoona, you know, being that they are kind of in areas that don't necessarily have one of your offices available to them immediately. I know Cordova has the Anchorage office to work with directly, but how would you work with some of those other communities if they have folks who may be interested in being able to set up a Miller's Trust?
So for those of you online who couldn't hear the question was, if you're outside Juneau and Ketchikan, where we have physical offices, how can you get help with a Miller Trust or any of the other legal services? So we have a 1-800 number for each office, and people can call and either request an application or ask to do the application by phone. And if you've gotten a letter from public assistance saying you're over income and need a Medicaid trust, you can send that letter to us with your application, and we'll know exactly it is what you need and why you need it. We can serve you after accepting the application in a variety of ways. So sometimes Deborah, who's based in Ketchikan, and I will fly out to the communities. We do house calls in Juneau and Ketchikan and in the places we visit. We can send documents by mail and then discuss them by phone. Sometimes we've worked with the social workers at Search so that people will come to the clinic and we'll be there on the telephone with their caregiver and also a social worker or a nurse or somebody else helping them at the clinic. Whoever the person is comfortable having there and wants to have there to walk through the information about, you know, how the trust operates and what the Medicaid benefits are. We're happy to meet with the senior and whoever's giving them help. So we can send documents by mail and discuss them over the phone. The other thing that we've been able to do in Sitka, and hopefully in the future other communities, is that we've worked with pro bono lawyers that are in the community to help them, to walk them through the paperwork, to get them comfortable with this process of setting up the income trusts and doing the other paperwork. So pro bono attorneys can help in Sitka right now, and then we're available to work with the pro bono attorneys to answer questions. We also just got our applications loaded up on the internet, so people can also apply on the web. If you Google Alaska Legal Services, there's a link to all our applications, and you can fill out the Juneau and Ketchikan applications online. And I should mention, we don't charge for our services. We're a private, nonprofit law firm. We're not part of the state or federal government. We operate on grants. So we provide services to eligible applicants without any charge. The trusts, if you're hiring a private attorney, will cost in the neighborhood of about $1,000. So that charge doesn't exist when you're working with Alaska Legal Services. Cheryl.
Can you explain pickle people and what the difference is between pickle people and Medicaid folks? They sound the same.
Oh, the question is about what are pickle people? And the answer is long and complicated, and I don't understand all of it. But for the Medicaid eligibility categories, when public assistance is looking at income and assets, there's rules that apply to everybody. But there's a special group of people called pickle people, because there's a congressman named either Senator or Representative Pickle who was able to get a special category of individuals into the Medicaid program. And I cannot quote you what the details of that category are, but there's a very small group of people in Alaska who qualify as pickle people, who don't necessarily need to use the trust. But public assistance will tell you if you're a pickle person and if you meet the pickle eligibility category.
My understanding is if you're at the limit of what you should be, what makes you eligible, and the cost that really puts you over, it can't take you off. But I don't see how that's a lot different from bringing it into the trust.
So the question is how the category, this pickle people exception to Medicaid income and asset rules is different from using the trust. And it's a very unique and specialized category of eligibility that I could not quote you the rules on offhand. I am not that good.
I noticed that in some states they have a Medicaid Miller's Trust packet for people to just fill out themselves that the public assistance people hands out. Have you ever thought about just setting up a template for people you can hand out to people who want to just do it themselves?
So the question is whether we thought about doing just a handout packet for people to do trust themselves. Because we provide services for free, we haven't produced a do-it-yourself packet because we feel more comfortable when we're helping a family to be able to sit with them and explain paragraph by paragraph what's in the trust. It's a 22-page document filled with a lot of legalese, and it can be really confusing. And we also want to walk people through how the trust is going to operate in their particular situation, so they understand the rules, they know what's expected of them, and they don't end up in a situation where they're just trying to do their best and end up operating the trust incorrectly and then potentially either being penalized or terminated from the Medicaid program, or having to pay back money to the state for getting Medicaid benefits when they shouldn't have been getting. Any other questions? Okay.
Sorry. So if I'm working with a client and they're looking to get into a certain program, and they come to me and say, "Oh, Michael, I make $1 too much, and I can't get into the program." So we can take that $1 and put it into a trust.
So yeah, you can set up a trust to absorb that extra $1 a month. And people can actually do it at the same time. They can fill out their Medicaid application and fill out our application. It doesn't necessarily have to be one first, then the other. They can do both at the same time and just let public assistance know, like this client is working with legal services or a private attorney to set up this trust. And so you're going to see that the reported income is $1 too much, but understand while you're processing this that they're getting the trust set up. Other questions from any of the other communities that are on the OWL? Okay, Eileen.
I would just like clarification. We hear the word Miller Trust and we hear Asset Trust. So how do you differentiate what is?
Okay. The question is, what's the terms Miller Trust, Asset Trust, Income Trust? What's the difference? So a Miller's Trust is just another word for the income trust. That's the kind of trust we do to absorb extra monthly income. Asset trusts are to hold things like a big cash settlement or a big savings account. And that's, if you hear a pooled trust or special needs trust, those are both asset trusts. And that's what private attorneys handle. Oh, there's a question in Ketchikan.
I didn't get it. Can you repeat that part about the trust fund? You mentioned something about starting it up with, what is it, an extra dollar, you said?
Hang on, we're having trouble hearing you. Hang on, we're going to turn your volume up.
I just didn't get the last part. The last question
Okay, we can hear you better now. Could you ask the question over?
Okay, I just need you to repeat the Medicaid about starting a trust fund. You know, he
Okay, about
mentioned
starting-
something about starting with an extra dollar, or can you repeat that part?
Sure. So there was a question about if somebody's just $1 over and they want to apply for Medicaid, what can they do? So they can get their regular Medicaid application into public assistance. They can also apply to Alaska Legal Services or contact a private attorney. And while they're qualifying, doing all the parts of the regular Medicaid application, they can also start working with an attorney to set up the trust and the trust account to absorb that extra dollar that's coming in every month. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Any other questions from our other communities there? All right, well, we're gonna take a, say, 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and talk about powers of attorney. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I guess started with round 2 here with Holly Handler. Just another brief introduction for those of you who weren't here first thing. Holly has served as the supervising attorney for Southeast Alaska Services. Holly, for Southeast Alaska, for Alaska Legal Services Corporation since 2006. She represents low-income and elderly clients in housing, healthcare, public benefits, as well as domestic relation cases. In addition, she serves as counsel for Alaska Native tribal tribes and tribal organizations in matters regarding tribal sovereignty and child protection. Before working at Alaska Legal Services, Holly was a public defender in Anchorage, Palmer, Bethel, and in New York City, and then in 1999 graduated from the Harvard Law School. So she's going to talk to us here in a few minutes about establishing an alternative decision maker and tell us a little bit about the differences between a power of attorney and guardianship.
Thanks again to Tanya, and thanks for all of you who are sticking around. Sorry you have me again. That's one of the problems with dealing with small nonprofits in Alaska. You don't get a lot of variety. So somebody in the last session asked about whether there's fill-in-the-blank forms to set up Medicaid income trusts, and there's not. But there are fill-in-the-blank forms for powers of attorney and advanced healthcare directives, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. And those forms are distributed in the different communities with the materials that Tanya Muldoon has provided. And here they are at the back of the room on the blue table and also at our resource table out in the hallway. So alternative decision makers are people who can speak up for you if you can't speak up for yourself. And that could be because of an accident where you are in a coma, or it could be because of a severe disability, or it could be because of Alzheimer's or dementia or some other thing that affects your capacity to express your own wishes. Powers of attorney and healthcare directives are something that every able-bodied adult over 18 should think about and have in place, because accidents don't discriminate between disabled and non-disabled or elderly or non-elderly. It's just a good tool for just dealing with the regular day-to-day business in your life, to have somebody there appointed in case something happens to you and you can't speak up. So when we talk to people about planning and getting documents, legal documents in place to deal with their affairs, we generally talk about powers of attorney, living will, which is also known as healthcare directives or advanced directives, and then a regular will. And the main difference is that a will conveys what you want to happen after you pass away. So it's only effective after you're deceased. A will has no effect while you're alive. So if you've appointed somebody as executor or personal representative for you in your will, that doesn't help you if decisions have to be made for you while you're alive. That appointment only takes effect after your death. While you're alive, a power of attorney and a living will are the ways that you express your wishes and you convey what you want to happen to you and who you want to speak up on your behalf. These two documents are only effective while you're alive. They cease to have any effect after your death. So if you've appointed somebody to be your power of attorney and you pass away, the power of attorney has no authority after the moment of your death. They can't take care of your estate. They can't take care of your affairs with that power of attorney form. So it's only effective. So as an example, somebody was helping their mom out. She passed away, and this daughter came to us and said, I went to their apartment, and the landlord wouldn't let me in. I showed them the power of attorney, and I went to the bank, and I showed them the power of attorney, and they said they couldn't help me. And that's because after her mom passed away, the power of attorney ceased to have any effect, and we needed to do something else to take care of her estate. So the power of attorney and healthcare directives are fill in the blank forms. They don't have to go through court. They don't have to be registered anywhere. They just have to be held in safekeeping by you and the person you've entrusted to speak up for you. The power of attorney, this form here, that covers, unless you've limited it, it covers all decisions you would make for yourself in your life. So it covers banking transactions, insurance, lawsuits and litigation. The only thing it doesn't cover is health care. You have a separate health care power of attorney that's part of your living will or advanced health care directives. Same, different terms for the same thing. And the reason your health care power of attorney is separated out in different documents is because it doesn't do much good to appoint somebody to express your wishes as far as health and medical care if you haven't explained what those wishes are. So what the living will does is it lays out a series of decisions and choices you've made as far as what you want for your medical care, plus the person you want to carry that out. So the medical and health care are all contained in the living will, and your non-medical, regular business financial affairs would be handled through your power of attorney. And explaining the importance of doing a power of attorney and living will is to go over what happens if they're not in place. If you don't have a power of attorney and living will in place, and something happens to you where you can't speak up for yourself, and decisions have to be made for you, like you have to set up a Medicaid trust, or you need care that's going to be provided in multiple court, or you need to deal with insurance and pay for your care at Bartlett. If you have not set up a power of attorney or a living will to make those decisions for you, and decisions have to be made, the only option available is for the state court system to appoint a guardian or a conservator for you. As you can imagine, going through court to have somebody appointed to be your guardian or conservator is not an easy process. In an emergency situation, it could be done on a 72-hour basis. But that is only the most dire, absolute life and health threatening emergencies. Otherwise, the process can be 3 months or longer. If it's a contested case where the family members are disagreeing and arguing with each other about who should be guardian and there's objections, that case can take 6 months or a year. So the 10 or 15 minutes it takes to fill out these forms can save an inordinate amount of time later on, because if there's a power of attorney in place, you don't need to go through court to get somebody appointed to take care of your affairs. So the power of attorney form, for those of you who haven't filled it out, is relatively short, and you can design your power of attorney form to be as broad or as narrow as you choose. You fill out your name, you're called the principal in the power of attorney form, and you fill out your address, and then you decide who you want to be your power of attorney. It can be one person, or it can be multiple people. And if you've appointed 2 or more people, you can decide, do I want these 2 people to serve together so that both of them have to sign off if a decision has to be made? Or do I want them to serve as alternates, so who's ever available can sign? You can appoint more than 2 people, but it does get more complicated. The other thing you can decide right on the power of attorney form is how broad you want it to be. Do you want it to cover everything so that somebody can take care of everything if something happens to you? Or do you just want it to cover particular things? So for example, if you're leaving town and you need to sell your car, you can fill out a power of attorney form for your friend just to sell your car. And it can just be limited to a certain amount of time. So you can do a very limited power of attorney in addition to doing a general one. You also have the choice to make it durable or not. Durable just means that there's no expiration date. It'll last forever unless you sign something else revoking it or appoint a different power of attorney. Or you could have it limited, just so it's a year. You could also have it just be effective the date you sign it. So as soon as you sign this document, you give somebody the power to be power of attorney. Or you can just make it be a springing power of attorney, where it springs to life in the event that you're disabled. So as a planning tool, if people are just having a power of attorney in place in case something happens to them in the future, you can have it just be effective upon your disability and have it be an ongoing durable power of attorney that's not going to expire. And the way a power of attorney springs to life if you're disabled is that there is a medical professional that puts something in writing confirming your disability. Usually it's going to be 2 medical professionals, but especially in our smaller communities or in case of emergency, 1 will do. Tanya has inquired about whether there's a standard form that medical professionals use to document disability so that it can just be attached to the power of attorney. There's nothing, unfortunately, that simple. Everybody uses a different form. Some doctors use letters, other doctors use a hospital form that's different for every hospital. We have drafted a form that medical professionals can use, but certainly there's nothing saying that medical professionals have to use one form or another. So if you're taking care of a parent, there's an emergency situation that happens and your power of attorney, and the power of attorney is written so that it springs to life in the event of their disability, you're going to need a copy of the power of attorney, and you're going to need something from the doctor or nurse or somebody else at the medical provider's office that documents their disability so that it can be used. If the power of attorney is properly signed, and if it is based on disability and you have the documentation for that disability, Alaska law says that it has to be respected. So Alaska law commands anybody dealing with the power of attorney to respect the power of attorney, with very few exceptions. This can become tricky if you are dealing with somebody who gives you a power of attorney and it looks suspicious to you, or if the disability documentation just doesn't look right to you and you're concerned about elder abuse. So this is one of these fuzzy gray areas of the law where there are no neat questions and guidelines I or anybody else can give you. In these kind of situations, we tend to work with adult protective services and medical providers, and we try to work with the family to do a little bit more digging before we just go ahead and turn somebody's whole estate or business or something else over to a power of attorney. There can be a lot of red flags, especially if somebody is trying to use a power of attorney to, let's say, transfer their mom or dad's property to them, or trying to do something that looks like a self-interested transaction where somebody's using a power of attorney to benefit themselves. So if you are dealing as an agency with somebody who presents you a power of attorney, your only legal obligation is to look at it and determine if it seems valid on its face, and if it's dependent on disability, that there's some documentation of the disability. But you also have alternate obligations, as for some of you, mandatory reporters, and just everybody's general moral obligations to try to prevent elder abuse, to maybe slow down in some certain instances if you see power of attorneys that either are acting in ways that seem abusive or exploitative, or if you have something that just doesn't look right on its face. One of the complications of powers of attorney, and one of the reasons it's so hard to police and why these can be an avenue for elder abuse, is because they're not registered with the court. There's no comprehensive database of these. There's no central registry. So somebody can fill out a power of attorney and make a few copies for their family, and that's really all that has to be done. The way to revoke it is either to put something in writing saying, I revoke this power of attorney, and then try to give it to everybody who you think might have the original power of attorney, or to do a new one. But if you've appointed a power of attorney and they use it with a company or an agency or somebody who doesn't have access to the new one, it can be hard to tell that that document has been revoked, because there is no way to look it up. You just have to inquire with the family, try to do some digging and independent research on your own. And the power that a power of attorney gives is huge and broad and can be very dangerous, because it lets somebody act as if they were you. We were assisting a woman many years ago whose power of attorney was trying to get their mom's house mortgaged and take out a loan to mortgage their house that had been all paid off. So that raised red flags with us, although the loan officer that they were dealing with was ready to turn over the money to the power of attorney. So that raised some issues, and we worked with Adult Protective Services, and we were able to put a stop to it. But for a bank or an insurance agency, they really don't have any way of knowing whether a power of attorney has been revoked unless a new power of attorney is able to circulate it around to everybody they could have a copy of the old. Any questions so far before I go on? Yeah.
What if we have a member who, in my opinion, really needs a power of attorney, but is not in the right state of mind to make these decisions himself? Is there any avenue to take with that situation?
So the question, if you couldn't hear it on the link communities, is what happens if somebody really needs a power of attorney, but they might not have the wherewithal to understand and sign it? And that can be a tricky situation. Sometimes we work with patients who have been diagnosed with dementia at the hospital who really need a power of attorney. Some of them have moments of lucidity. First thing in the morning, they're able to have a conversation and reflect back that they understand what it is that they're being asked to do and what their wishes are. And in that case, sometimes you can work with somebody so that you can catch them in a moment where they do appear to have that capacity. So maybe if it's somebody who's got kind of like a cyclical disorder, you can catch them on a day where they're actually functioning pretty well and can comprehend what's going on. If they don't have that period of lucidity or aren't coming out of a cycle where they're not in their right mind, they can't sign a power of attorney. So you can't sign a power of attorney if you don't have capacity. You can't sign a living will if you don't have capacity. And you can't sign a regular will if you don't have capacity. And one thing the power of attorney can't do, although it's otherwise very powerful, is you can't use a power of attorney to sign a will. So a will can only be signed by a person who has capacity. And that's a protection against abuse and exploitation.
Who makes that decision if they have capacity, though? That's where it kind of gets into a gray area.
Yeah. So the question is who makes the decision about whether the person has capacity. So this can be really tricky. If you're sitting down with your family member to do this and helping them, it's going to be your judgment call whether you have asked them to sign it if you don't think they really understand it. If they're doing it with a professional who's subject to rules and regulations, they can't ask you to sign something or have your family member sign something if they don't think you have capacity. It's really just a judgment call. As attorneys, it's just our rules of professional ethics that prevent us from having somebody sign something when they don't have capacity. And sometimes it can end up in a court battle. So let's say, my mom has signed a power of attorney when I know that she's been in care for Alzheimer's for 2 years, but my brother has had her sign a power of attorney. He tries to go use it to take off all the money in her bank account. I can talk to the bank and see if the bank will slow things down, but it may end up in court where end up presenting medical evidence to a judge to say that the power of attorney is invalid and can't be used because the person lacked capacity and you get a court order. So that's one of the gray areas the court sometimes deals with. Sometimes what we'll do if there's a questionable situation, if we just don't have the ability to make the decision, we don't know whether the person really understands or not. Sometimes we'll have to go to the person's treating physician and ask him to give a written opinion about whether they think the person has capacity or not, and then we'll document that in our files. Any other questions before we continue?
This is looking at it from the other end. What is the recourse if one goes to a financial institution? Some years ago, I dealt with a power of attorney for my parents, and several banks, most of them looked at it and were okay. One of them said, "Oh, our policy says we can't respect this." Yeah. I mean, is this something that you see, and how does one deal with that? I used the uniform, I used the statutory form, so I was pretty sure that there was not a defect in the actual document under Alaska law. But
so the question is what to do when you're dealing with a bank or another company that just won't respond to and respect the power of attorney.
We don't do that.
Right,
Okay.
and there is at least one bank in town that we have problems with because Alaska statutes say you shall follow the power of attorney. There's no wiggle room. So sometimes we will call the legal department of the bank and talk to them about it and talk about the issue and go over what the statutes say. And it's never come to the point where we've had to go to court on that, although that would be an option. Typically, the person who is the power of attorney that we're trying to help doesn't want to start a lawsuit and get involved in all that. So we'll just, we'll try to figure out a way to get around it. So we've never had to go to court on it, but that would be the ultimate recourse if there's no other way of dealing with somebody who just won't respect the power of attorney.
So that is something that you've seen. It's like, I've heard more presentations on problems where the power of attorney, where the person using it is the problem, but occasionally it seems like you get the one where the institution will not honor it appropriately. So you have been seeing that, but you've been mostly managing to work that around.
Yeah, we've found a workaround so far since I've been there, but it can create a real problem if you have, rent you need to pay and you need to get money out of the bank and the particular bank won't work with you. It can be pretty devastating.
There was one worked around it. Fortunately, my parents still had the wherewithal to deal directly with the bank if necessary. Yeah. It was a convenience rather than an absolute necessity to use the POA.
Yeah, I mean, some people put another name on their bank account to get around the problem of working with a bank that has a power of attorney. But putting a second name on a bank account can create a whole series of other problems where, if you put your adult son on your bank account thinking that that'll be fine, he'll just take care of it if something happens to you. Well, if your son gets, doesn't pay his credit card bills and he's sued for $50,000, they can now garnish your account because he has his name on it.
How would that work with the electronic banking?
How would that work with electronic
Because
banking?
you got a password,
Right?
and so wouldn't that solve some of the problems? I don't know if it's if it's an ethical issue or if it solves the problem.
That is an excellent question that I won't answer.
Will you let those folks know what the question was?
The question is, what about electronic banking? If you have the ability to just use somebody's password and log in, I'm sure there's something that you click on to agree that you somehow have the authority or you are the person doing that. So I'm not sure how that would work. It would be different for every website and what they make you click on and agree. Cheryl.
What if the state of Alaska law says they're required to obey? What about out of state? A bank in Florida, for example.
Right. So we've had different experiences dealing with companies and agencies out of state when somebody's trying to use an Alaska power of attorney. And I've got to give you the honest answer, which is I don't know the definitive, legal answer to this, because we've always just used a workaround. Either, the Florida bank or other company just follows the Alaska power of attorney, or we've been able to manage to have a power of attorney assigned for that particular state. It's something that should work in other states in theory and according to the law, but there can be hiccups and sometimes we have to do workarounds. Any other questions on power of attorney? Okay. So the power of attorney is going to be signed through a notary when you finalize it, and there's notaries at our legal services offices. There should be somebody at every local courthouse that's a notary. Banks have notaries. And if necessary, if you're in Ketchikan or Juneau, we'll go do house calls or calls at the hospital to get powers of attorney signed. And a lot of hospitals and medical providers now have notaries on staff to sign papers.
The papers that I've seen say if you're in the hospital or like a nursing home, the employees there cannot notarize.
If they have a notary at the hospital, they usually have a notary that's not your doctor or your nurse who's in the administration that can notarize papers. Anything else on powers of attorney before I talk briefly about advanced directives? Okay. Turn this up just in case we need it. So the power of attorney takes care of all your business except for medical. So I'll just touch real briefly on the healthcare directives, which are also known as living wills. This is another fill in the blank form. This one doesn't have to be signed in front of a notary. It can be signed just in front of a witness. And what the living will does is it's a form that lists different types of medical decisions, including end-of-life care. And with this particular form, you can just fill out the parts that are important to you. You don't have to fill out every part of it, other than your signature. You just fill out what's important to you. So there's questions about end-of-life care and what kind of care is desired. If you're in a terminal state, whether you want a prolonged life or not prolonged life, and then what kind of services, nutrition, hydration, pain relief. There's also fill in the blank spots where you can just write out your own wishes if they don't conform to a particular fill in the blank. And I'll disclose that on my form, I wanted to make it perfectly clear to my providers that I am not pain tolerant, that if I'm in a position where I can't speak up for myself, I want liberal pain medication. I am not stoic. So there wasn't really anything that conveyed that adequately that I read. So I was able to write that in just the other wishes spot. And other people have religious wishes, other wishes about who they want around or don't want around, or just other particular things that are important to them, but it's not something that a legal form drafter necessarily thought of. So there's leeway in here to express wishes that are not necessarily part of the fill in the blank form. There's also parts in here about mental health care, it's optional. Some people have wishes on that, some people don't. And it's just up to you to fill out the parts that are important to you and leave blank the parts that are not important to you. For the living will healthcare directives, this again doesn't go to the court, it doesn't go into a central registry, you should give it to your family. But the place where this should be deposited is at your local clinic or your local hospital, where you're most likely to get medical care. And they'll keep that on file, and now they'll scan it in and have it as part of your electronic record. One thing that the living will or healthcare directives does not cover is covered in a Comfort One order. So while the healthcare directives has provisions about end-of-life care and whether you want artificial nutrition, hydration, pain relief, etc., it doesn't include whether you want a DNR order or not. Maybe in the future it'll be all inclusive in one document, but right now most hospitals have a separate document referred to as Comfort One or DNR, and that's different from a living will because it's a more extreme and life or death decision, and that's whether in an emergency to use CPR and a defibrillator. So the Comfort One program is under the oversight of the Department of Health and Social Services. It has to be registered with the state, unlike a living will, and it's got to be on their particular form. And then there's a procedure if you're in your own home for EMTs to identify whether you have a DNR order or not. It's not 100% foolproof. There are instances where there has been a problem identifying whether there's an order in place or not, and if there's ever any doubt, medical professionals will always provide care to save your life. But in the majority of instances, it is effective, it does convey the wishes, and medical providers will follow it. So if there's an emergency and the EMTs come and there's a DNR order in place, the police won't be called. You don't necessarily have to be rushed to the hospital. It allows you to die in your own home if that is your wish. So, I guess that should be added here as another document to have in place if that's important to you. But at least, the very least, the living will conveys generally your healthcare wishes if you can't speak up for yourself, and somebody to do that for you and advocate on your behalf.
When you say registered with the state for not resuscitating, is that registered with Health and Social Services?
Do you know, Angela?
I can help explain.
Can you explain that, Tanya?
The Comfort One program is run through public health. It's what's that?
Get to the microphone.
Okay. Yeah. It's run through public health. It is a form that's filled out actually with a physician, and the physician actually has to identify whether or not the individual has a end-of-life issue that where they wouldn't benefit from having CPR,
Right.
Or some other type of illness or disability that, again, they would not benefit from having CPR, and that they've made this choice. And so the document is signed by the individual and by the medical provider, and then it's actually sent to one of the regional EMS agencies throughout the state, which is, there's 5 of them. The closest one for those of us here in Southeast Alaska is down in Sitka. They keep that on file. But then the patient receives a form that has a card that can go in their wallet. So if EMS has ever had to be called and they need to be identified whether or not they have a Comfort One or not, they have that card in their wallet. And they also get a form that then can also be posted up on their refrigerator to, again, if they're in their home, can be identified as being a part of the Comfort One.
Right,
So,
I've seen those, but when you said registration, I was like, huh?
So it is registered, but it's registered. It's actually registered through the EMS regional offices, and they're a grantee under public health, and so they do also, notify the state. So it is indirect, but yes, the state still has, idea about what's going on with that through public health records. So,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. We have another question.
On the DNR or the Comfort One, now, can the guardian of the individual sign that? And is there anything allowing or requiring that the individual understand what the guardian is just signing on their behalf?
I can answer that one again too. I was going to say, with my background, I at one time was a national guardian. A guardian actually can't sign for a DNR. That's similar to like what Holly was mentioning earlier about the will, where a power of attorney or another decision maker can't make that decision for them. When it comes to a guardian making an end-of-life decision like that, it involves an ethics committee in order to be able to make that decision. It can be brought back to the court, and a court hearing can take place, and a doctor and the individual may be able to bring it back to court and get an order that way. But the guardian themselves normally cannot make that direct request or an answer without having at least the input and a formal setting with additional people and providers involved. So an ethics committee is oftentimes what is taking place if there's an emergency situation and a guardian's in place, and the individual's in a hospital, they're dying. There needs to be a decision made whether or not they can do a Comfort One. What will happen then is an ethics committee is formed with a ethics individual from the actual hospital, normally 1 to 2 physicians, oftentimes a nurse, any family or friends who may know end-of-life wishes. If the individual is able to do or put any feedback into that, their feedback is given at that point, and then a plan is developed as to what's the end-of-life care look like. So, but it's separate from the actual Comfort One, so there can't actually be a signature on that Comfort One that's put on by the guardian. So.
Okay.
I'll be glad when I leave. The 5 wishes, is another form of living will, I believe?
Okay. We don't use that form. So.
Okay,
I can answer that one.
It's available, and I know some people that use it, I just didn't know if it's legal in the state.
The 5 wishes is it's a form that's used. I see it oftentimes down at Ketchikan. It's one that's been purchased by an agency. It's a beautiful form. It's very simple to fill out. It is literally 5 wishes for your end of life. It is very similar to the living will. I haven't seen anybody who's had any conflicts with using the 5 wishes forms. I think one of the things that at least I've seen in practice is the living will form that is used, that's set up with the state statutes, which is the form that actually is copied in the back of the room. It's also available in all the different libraries today too. It breaks things down a little cleaner than the 5 wishes does.
Yeah.
It is a little bit more complicated.
It's a little more medically oriented instead of spiritual or emotional oriented.
It is definitely. The comment here is that it's more medically oriented instead of spiritual or comfort oriented, and that is true. It is a great starting point. It certainly is a document that's used in many places. If there's going to be decisions that have to be made that are kind of over a long period of time, the living will form can be more specific to the duties of an individual to be able to act as somebody else's decision maker. So placement, some of the end of life issues, some of the issues around autumnal gifts, or if you're looking at being able to do like alternative decision makers as well. I don't believe the 5 wishes form actually has the alternative individuals listed on that as an option. So So I've seen it in practice. It certainly has been used,
It's used here
um,
in the state.
and it definitely is used in the state. Yeah. So, but it's normally driven by an agency who has it and who's purchased it, and then uses it as their option. So, yeah, good question.
So the 5 wishes form then does do the basic of providing that alternative decision maker.
It does. The format with it is, it has 5 questions on it, and I don't have one actually in front of me here, so please forgive me, I can't speak specifically, but it has 5 questions, and it talks about what the end-of-life wishes are, and so it's simple, it's very personalized, in the sense that it may, how would you like, your care? Would you like to, how would you like pain management? Those kinds of things. So it breaks it down, but it does list who would you like to help make medical decisions for you. Where the living will form, and again we have those copies, is going to be very concrete with a lot of different ideas over the full range of healthcare decisions and that would need to be made. So it's a more thorough form to use. And especially as a lot of what we're doing today is trying to do some pre-planning so that hopefully you're not having to make decisions at, when things are in crisis. So 5 wishes is sometimes helpful when you have somebody who may get confused when having to try to fill out kind of a living will. It's a way that is a little bit more personalized. I feel that I would like this, kind of answers instead of filling in some of the blanks that the living will form has. Angela?
I just have a question. You may have already answered this. So you said when the person dies, the power of attorney is gone. They cannot make any further decisions. So is it better for someone to become a legal guardian, or is the same thing happen if a person dies, the legal guardian doesn't have any say over? Did you already answer that?
He didn't.
Okay.
So that's a good question. If the question is if the power of attorney ceases at the end of somebody's life, does a court-appointed guardian's authority, can that extend? And it can't. So it's just like a power of attorney, where a guardian won't have the ability to make any decisions after the person has passed away. It has to be done through the personal representative or the executor.
And that's the same with guardianship.
Any other questions in our Southeast communities? All right, well, thanks for sticking with me, and I'm going to be out at the resource table if anybody has any. Oh, there is a question.
Do we have some questions? Can you push,
turn the
I was
volume
going to say,
up.
when you turn the volume up, can you hit your button on here so we can hear you?
I did already. I did.
Can you hear me?
Let's keep, we'll turn it up real loud here.
Yeah, if you can get next to your microphone.
I'll help translate here.
Yeah.
It's on the. Oh, I see. It's up there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. My question is, we make out the advance directives, we have them in the hospital here, but then we get transferred to another hospital. Can those be transferred with you?
The question is, if you filled out advance directives and have them on file in one hospital, can those be transferred to another hospital? And the hospital should be able to share those medical records.
How about out of state?
How about out of state?
Out of state? I mean, there should be an ability for one hospital to share the advance directives just like they would be able to share a prescription or any other kind of medical information.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Do you have to get permission to share those records?
The question is, do you have to give permission for one medical provider to share medical records with an out-of-state provider? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. That would be a good question to ask a medical provider.
Yeah, maybe.
That's, we get that a lot.
It's a good question, yeah.
We can't share. I can't share this. So if there is that change, then
it may not transfer because they didn't give permission to share records.
Right, I don't know what HIPAA would say about, sharing that information between providers.
They might under the continuity of care and
They
the
might.
emergency situation, you may be able to do that.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Any other questions from the communities? Okay. Well, if anybody in an outlying area wants to call and ask a question in private, can apply for services, call our Juneau or Ketchikan offices, or if you're in Cordova, you can call our Anchorage offices. And for folks here in Juneau, I'll be at the information table, can try to answer questions as best I can there. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll hang up for a second. I wanted to be able to introduce Dan Austin, who has served as the general manager of St. Vincent de Paul Society of Juneau for the last 17 years. He is a founding member of the Juneau Homeless Coalition, now the Juneau Coalition on Housing and Homelessness. Under his direction, the Society provides permanent, affordable housing for more than 130 low-income households and operates a family homeless shelter of 24 rooms. Among these is Smith Hall, a 24 permanent rent-subsidized apartments for very low-income seniors. During his 26 years in Juneau, Mr. Austin has worked as a youth counselor, environmental program coordinator, staff to members of the Senate Resource and Finance Committees, the House Finance Committee, and as a budget analyst for the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. In addition to his work for St. Vincent de Paul, he provides consulting and development services to nonprofit organizations. He is a developer and a project manager for Haynes Assisted Living Home, Inc. And Dan's here to talk to us today about homelessness in Southeast Alaska. Thank you. Come on up, Dan. Just a hair of feedback. There you go.
Actually, I thought I was here to answer questions, but never being at a loss. Let me just kind of introduce how I view the problem of homelessness and affordable housing for seniors, and it's really very much the same problem as it is for all of the people in this country who are having a really difficult time right now finding that basic, most important, probable necessity of life, which is a shelter. And I think most of us are aware that disparity between those of us who have decent housing every day and those who don't has been growing, and that the numbers of people in this country that are homeless have been growing for a long time, at least the last couple of decades. And I'm old enough to remember when homeless people who were predominantly middle-aged males suffering from alcohol abuse and living in Skid Row apartments in the inner cities. And that's not really the case anymore. That represents about 10% of the actual homeless population in this country. The rest of the folks that are homeless or having difficulty with housing are folks that we don't normally see every day, or we do see them, we just don't recognize them as being homeless. They are children in our schools. They are adults that are standing beside us in the checkout counter at the store. They're living at St. Vincent de Paul's family shelter. They're living with relatives and friends, couch surfing, etc. As a little bit of backup, I can tell you that the homeless rate per capita in the city of Juneau, Alaska is 3 times that of Los Angeles County, California. Yes, 3 times per capita. We have 3 times as many people per 1,000 population that are homeless as they do in Los Angeles County. If Los Angeles County had the same rate of homelessness, there would be 150,000 homeless people on the streets of LA. I can also tell you that Juneau, Alaska is the most homeless city in Alaska, 3 times that of Fairbanks and 1.5 times that of Anchorage on a per capita basis. So we estimate there are about 500 homeless individuals in this town of 30,000 people. Many of them are seniors. In fact, the fastest growing segment of that homeless population is seniors. When I started in this business, as Tanya said, 17 years ago, it was extremely rare that an elderly person, a senior person, would come to us to find a room in our shelter, a 200 square foot room in our shelter. Today, we have about 30% of the people in our shelter are elderly. If we look at the wait list for housing in this town, in our wait list at St. Vincent de Paul, you can see that in 10 years, 40% of the homeless in Juneau will be seniors. 40%. So, that being said, that kind of gives a little bit of a background. We know that the senior population is the fastest growing segment of the population in Juneau. It is the fastest growing segment of the homeless population, and it's only going to get worse. One of the things that has hit us hard over the last few years is about 4 years ago, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, in order to achieve the necessary budget cuts that were imposed upon them by Congress, decided to eliminate what is called the Section 202 housing program, which was a housing program specifically to build low-income supportive housing for low-income seniors. In other words, this is housing like we have at Smith Hall that was built almost 18 years ago now, that provides really quality, decent housing to very low-income seniors. That is, seniors with incomes of under $30,000 a year, and it provides it at a cost of 30% of their monthly income. And that's a model that we've used in this country for almost 75 years. We've said that, for low-income persons, 30% of their monthly income is probably an appropriate amount of money to pay for housing. That's what we use in the Section 8 program and other supportive housing programs. So up until about 4 years ago, every year this country built an inadequate amount, but some of these supportive housing units, which allowed very low-income seniors to have a place to live. At the time that program was ended, there were, at that time, 9 eligible households for every unit that was built. So we never had an adequate low-income senior housing program in this country, but we had a program. We now have no program at all. So what we've seen naturally is a huge increase in the wait list for people to get into those existing units. And our Smith Hall unit and our Smith Hall project and Mountain View home in downtown are the only 2 supported senior housing projects in this town. The only 2 places where very low-income seniors can go and expect to find housing at a price they can afford. So that's kind of the background of things. I think that if we're looking for an answer to homelessness, whether it's for seniors or any of our low-income people in our community, there's really 2 parts to that equation, naturally. One of them is, are there enough units? Are there enough individual apartment units for all the very low-income seniors or others in this town? Absolutely not. Of course not. Of course not. We know that. About 20% of our entire population is in that income category of very low income. So about 20% of this population of 12,000 households, 30,000 people, 12,000 households, would fall into that eligibility category for low-income housing. And that's about twice the number of people in households as we actually have housing for at that price. So it's no better, it's as bad for seniors as it is for everybody else in this community, but it's especially difficult on seniors because they're not looking forward normally to the possibility of increasing their income over time. Seniors are pretty well looking at fixed incomes for a long period of time, as we know. So you can't sit down with a senior household and say, well, we can move you into this Section 8 apartment or this low-income housing apartment, and then a couple of years down the road, you'll improve your income, you'll get a better job, and then you can move out and we'll make a room for somebody else. It's not going to happen that way. We know it's not going to happen that way. So number one is we don't have enough units of this kind of subsidized housing, and then number 2 is income. The fact of the matter is, if the Social Security income for seniors were high enough, you wouldn't need supportive housing. You wouldn't need subsidized housing. I believe, and I've done the numbers, I know that with the help of capital contributions from the state, we could build units of housing that we could deliver to market for about $500 a month. They would be super efficient. They would be extremely cost effective to operate, and they're almost affordable. They're almost affordable to seniors on the average Social Security income. That should be our goal. I think we should target what an affordable income, 30%, 40%, 45%. I don't know where exactly that number is. It's more than 30%, I can tell you that. We should target that affordable number. We should build units that can be operated for that affordable number. We should build those units, and seniors and everybody else who's looking for affordable housing should have choice and should not be having to enroll in government programs that sometimes assault our dignity as human beings, especially as senior citizens who have worked all your life, paid your Social Security taxes, done everything you were supposed to do as a citizen, find yourself out of the workforce, depending on Social Security, and you can't afford decent housing. That's unconscionable. There's no reason for that. We have the resources. We can build it. We can deliver it to market, and seniors could afford it if we paid attention to those things. I'm sorry, I'm going off on my soapbox here, but anyway, I would like to just open up to the audience and try to answer any questions I might be able to help with.
I'm the service coordinator at Mountain View Apartments.
Great.
And it's my responsibility to assist the individuals that live there. However, sometimes we do get individuals that come off the street, looking for housing, saying I'm homeless. It's not necessarily my responsibility to help them professionally, but morally I feel obligated. What can I do to send them in the right direction?
Well, you can send them to St. Vincent de Paul. They can call 789-5535, extension 7, and inquire about getting on the wait list for low-income affordable housing. And I have to tell you, folks, there's 150 people on that wait list right now, and it doesn't move very fast. And of the 66 people in our shelter today, there's 100 people waiting to get in, and half of those 66 people are children. And the movement has slowed down to a crawl. It used to be, when we used to do this, we used to be able to move people out of shelter within a few months. Doesn't happen anymore. They're stuck there for a year or two.
We have a question, Dan, over here in Ketchikan, too.
Yes, Ketchikan.
Yes, I was wondering if you can repeat the questions from the audience. We can't very much hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question from the audience was from a gentleman who is the service coordinator at Mountain View Senior Property here in Juneau. Where should he send folks who are not seniors but come walking into his place asking for affordable housing, low-income affordable housing? Other questions?
Do we still have Section 8 here in Juneau?
The Section 8 program. Section 8 program was the major program by which we subsidize housing for low-income people in this country today, other than public housing. We do have a Section 8 program. The application list for that program was closed last year, like it has been in the rest of the country for many years in most places. The program itself has changed quite a bit over the last couple of years. We have heard the rumor that at the end of this month that application may be opened up again, so people may apply again, and that would be a great thing. I'm sorry, the question from the audience was, do we still have a Section 8 program, and does it still exist in Juneau? So I'll try to get the question first next time. Any other questions I can help with? Tanya.
Dan, I know you're a part of the Juneau Homeless Coalition. Could you speak a little bit about homeless coalitions? And I know that some of the other communities have some challenges with homeless populations, some limited resources. Could you talk a little bit about what a homeless coalition is, what it can do for the community, and maybe any resources that might be available if community members were interested in looking at trying to establish one?
Okay, so Tanya just asked about if I could speak a little bit about the Juneau Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, which used to be called the Juneau Homeless Coalition, and similar designs and models statewide, and why they're really important ways to deal with homelessness. So years ago, we were looking at the homeless issue in Juneau. And when I say we, I mean several different agencies that provide services, homeless services or housing services to folks. And one of the things that really became apparent to us was that in some cases we were competing against each other for very limited resources to deal with our particular piece of that problem. For example, you might be a mental health services provider, and homelessness is a big piece of the mental health issues in this country. And so you would be out there trying to get some funding for your housing services for your mental health folks. Another advocate might be, as we were, a provider of shelter to homeless families with children, et cetera, et cetera. So we came together and said, rather than compete against each other for very limited resources, let's form a coalition, let's sit down as a group, come to the table, I'll take off my St. Vincent hat, you take off your jammy hat, let's sit down at the table, look at the problem of homelessness in our community from a holistic perspective, knowing that there's all kinds of little pieces to that, and then let's try to craft a solution where instead of competing with each other, we go in together and we bring the resources to this town. We've been very successful at that over these last 15 years or more. Every single year, the Juneau Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, thanks to the wonderful work of Mike Bellerin at Gastineau Human Services, we apply together for a grant from the state of Alaska, Alaska Housing Finance, Alaska Housing Finance. And we receive this basic homeless assistance program grant every single year, and then it goes out to 5 or 6 different agencies within our group to provide those services. So it helps support our shelter, it helps support rental assistance and eviction preventions, it helps provide operating support for the Aware Shelter, and many other services. So just in a pragmatic way, that's what a coalition can do. But there's much more to it than that. For example, in about a week or so, the statewide coalitions on housing and homelessness will be meeting in Juneau for their annual convention at the same conference. At the same time, the Governor's Council on Housing and Homelessness will be meeting in Juneau. So we're making a coordinated effort to bring this issue to the front. The coalition acts very much as an advocate on these issues. Perhaps some of you remember we have done in the past the Homeless Connect operation. Usually in the middle of January, we'll have a little thing going at Centennial Hall and provide services to homeless people and also information to the community. So outreach, education, funding, distribution, these are all of the things that a local coalition can do, and we work in conjunction with the statewide coalition. So it's a coordinated approach rather than a fragmented approach.
Do you know, do we have a campground, a Thane Road run by the city and borough of Juneau? Do we have something like that still? I've never seen it, but I've heard about it.
Yes. The question is, does Juneau still have the Thane campground, which is just south of town, on the road to Thane, and that's operated by the city and borough of Juneau. We built the Thane campground 17 years ago, and have operated it in various ways since then. It was operated by St. Vincent de Paul at one time, it was operated independently at one time, it's been operated by the city and borough of Juneau at one time. It is not operating in the wintertime at all. I do believe that there is some limited operations there in the summertime. And the idea there was to provide a safe, somewhat supervised place for homeless people to camp, or many times people that came to town to work seasonally and just didn't have the resources to get into regular housing. Any other questions from the audience or online? So I would encourage folks to look for the, in about a week or so, to look for the conference, and to please feel free and welcome to come and attend. There'll be many interesting workshops, tours of different affordable housing projects in town, and panel discussions on a lot of important subjects like I'm sure many of you have heard of the Housing First project that we've been talking about for some time. So a lot of this will get aired at that convention, at that conference as well.
Can you tell us again, Dan, when is the conference on homelessness?
September 29th is the first day, and it goes for 3 or 4 days, I believe.
At Centennial Hall?
At Centennial Hall. Thank you.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully other folks will kind of filter in as we get moving forward. So we wanted to be able to have a discussion today just to be able to provide information about the eligibility and availability of services and placement here in Southeast Alaska. And so I've asked several folks that work with different populations to come and be able to talk about what is actually available so that folks have an opportunity to be able to plan ahead a little bit about what services and placement options that they have. One of the things that I find in my job on a day-to-day basis is that we have limitations to what we offer in Southeast Alaska, and so oftentimes it results in people having to seek services in larger communities. And if people do a little bit of planning ahead in advance, it can help keep our elders and our family members with disabilities here at home and close to families, close to our communities, and being able to keep everybody centrally located back here in Southeast, and so we can take care of each other and as as a whole in a region. So I wanted to be able to introduce the panel that we have. Regrettably, Ms. Lori Cooper wasn't able to join us today, but Lisa Morley has been graciously willing to step in for her. Lisa moved to Alaska in 1995 after growing up in the flatlands of the Midwest over in Chicago. And she has been working for various social service agencies and GNO after completing her bachelor's degree at UAS. Lisa has been managing grants for the state since 2001 and is currently the manager of the grants unit for the Division of Senior and Disability Services. And so today she's going to talk with us a little bit about some of the developmental disability services that are available. And we'll have her start after I want to introduce the rest of our panel. So secondly, we have Blaine Hildebrand, and she comes to us from the Pioneer Home. She is a longtime Juneau resident, raised here in Southeast Alaska. She's been working for the Pioneer Home Central Office now for the last year. She graduated in 2008 from the Colorado Technical University with a bachelor's degree in finance as well as a bachelor's degree in healthcare management. Thirdly, we have Sharon Woodard, who is going to talk to us today in regards to some of the options that we have for long-term care placements. She started her career as a CNA in Reno, Nevada, back in 1995. For the next 12 years, she worked primarily in long-term care facilities. She graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno in 2007 with a bachelor's in social work. And while she was at the University of Nevada, Reno, she did an internship also with Elder Protective Services for the state of Nevada. And after graduation, she continued to work with Elder Services for the next 5 years or so. But her passion had been long-term care. And so she ended up working with social work again as an abuse counselor, and then eventually became the director of social services for a long-term care facility in Nevada. And then recently here moved to Juneau and is now working as the director of social services at Wildflower Court. So we certainly welcome her to our community with all of her experience. And then our next panelist is Angela Henley, who is a nurse assessor for Senior and Disability Services, and she'll talk to us today a little bit about our personal care assistance program and the Medicaid waiver. And Angela kind of followed her adventurous spirit and came to Alaska back in 1983 after graduating from the Baylor University in Dallas, Texas, with her BSN. She has spent the next 27 years working at Providence Hospital as a specialist nurse in the newborn intensive care unit. In 2012, she came to work with the state of Alaska as nurse assessor, and currently is conducting the DSDS nursing assessments for the PCA and Medicaid programs. And then she's based here in Juneau, and then she also travels statewide to conduct her business. So she's not always just here, but is also familiar with many other communities throughout the state. So lastly, we have Barbara Dick, who works with Adult Protective Services, and she's going to be talking to us today about some of our assisted living home placements and general relief. Barbara has been with the state of Alaska Adult Protective Services since 2006. She began her career as an investigator and then was promoted to manager for intake and general relief. As of the 1st of October in 2013, she's the manager for the new training and development unit within Adult Protective Services. As a part of her role, she will be tasked with developing and providing statewide trainings on the subjects of abuse and neglect of vulnerable adults and mandating reporting guidelines. Barbara has been in the field of social services since 1993, and she has received her Bachelor of Science degree from Minnesota State University and is currently working on her master's degree in social work at UAA. So I want to welcome our panel today to be able to give us hopefully some great information and some resources as to how we could plan ahead and be able to find placement and services that are available here in Southeast Alaska. So Lisa, I'm going to ask that you see if we can get you to come up. Again, please watch the cord that's there in front of you as you come around here. So and I'll sneak out of your way.
Hello, everyone. Well, I just wanted to let you know that, as Tanya mentioned, that I am filling in for my staff, Lori Cooper, who manages our developmental disability grant program and who also has many years of experience in managing other developmental disability programs for the state of Alaska as well. In my role, I oversee grants that serve all disabilities and all populations. So I'm going to start out by talking about developmental disability specifically because they kind of have their own system of eligibility and access into service. However, I do want to be clear knowing that we serve aging populations from birth to death, and each of those kind of has their own nuances. So if you have any questions about that I don't cover, about other populations, just let me know. An individual it has a family member, either they're a young child, an adolescent, or an adult, and if that individual needs assistance and they think they might have a developmental disability, their parents think they might, and they need some assistance in order to remain independent, there are definitely some steps that they need to go through first in order to be able to access those services that are available for them. In our state, we have our entry into the service delivery system. We provide funding to the STAR organizations, and there are 12 entities around the state that provide that STAR entryway, and these are all housed in local service provider agencies. In Juneau, REACH has the STAR agency, and Ketchikan, it's Community Connections. I believe we have a list back there of all of our local STAR organizations that you can access. So when you go into the STAR agency and you meet with that person, what they will do first is help you fill out an eligibility to determine whether or not you meet the criteria, the state's criteria for having a developmental disability. And that is defined in statute. And so you're going to have to get some backup material from your doctor and other things that will kind of show that you do need assistance. And in addition to that, they will ask if the condition or disability that you have manifested before the person was age 22. So sometimes if there's somebody has an accident or traumatic brain injury, that would qualify them as having a developmental disability if it did happen before they were age 22. If it's after age 22, then that gets kind of tricky. So that's just what the definition says. So the STAR coordinator, the person there, will help you to submit your application to our office. The main office then will make a determination, and you will receive a letter that you are either eligible for services or not eligible. If you are eligible for services, then you qualify for either grant services, or you can go on the wait list to receive Medicaid waiver services, which are really a much more comprehensive package of services that can help you in all aspects of your daily living that you need assistance with, including supported housing, supported job support, habilitation services, transportation, and so it's based on your need and your family's need. So the grant services then can be provided as you're on the wait list to provide respite or other services that you need in the short term, and the STAR provider will help you fill out your paperwork so that then you will be on the wait list for services. Our division currently has a wait list of, I think there's 600 individuals statewide on the wait list. And so they draw 200 names a year. Is that correct? 200 names a year, which is better than it used to be, but still that it's a process. So you have to so we have those grant funds in place so that if there's immediate services or respite or some other services that you need, those can be paid for with grant funds. And if you're not chosen on those 200 slots to receive waiver services, then every year they ask you to update your registration and review so that they can then score you and make sure that the folks who have the greatest need will then receive those services. So that is the DD's eligibility system. Did you want me to talk about any of the other stuff, or should we just go down the line?
Do we have any
Okay.
questions for Lisa at this point?
Does this cover Alzheimer's?
Nope. This is Alzheimer's services for an individual with Alzheimer's actually is different. It's a different level of care, and it's a different eligibility process. And I don't know if Angela's going to talk about that. So.
So some of the other information that's also here at the library in the back, as well as in the other libraries, throughout the different communities, is there's a list of some of the assisted living homes that cater to our developmental disability services that are paid for by Medicaid waiver services. There's also a list of the STAR coordinators. and some other information about IDD waivers available as well. So you're welcome to pick up those handouts, or as well as any other communities, be able to have those as resources. On that, it lists the different agencies, but it also gives you some statewide resources if you are looking for something in another community as well to be able to assist.
Yeah, we have the list, I think, of the care coordinators, the assisted living homes, the agencies that provide services for individuals with developmental disabilities, and then the STAR programs, which you can always contact, and that's a great resource. They can give you all, they have the knowledge of all of those resources, services. They can help with matching up grants to needs and stuff too. So I think that's a really good first place to start. Thanks.
You're welcome. Blaine with Pioneer Home, and she'll talk to us about some of our senior services that are available in some of our communities.
Right, so again, I'm Blaine. I'm with the Pioneer Homes. I am the senior services technician out there, so I manage the inactive and active waiting list for the homes. In the state, we currently have 6 homes. We have one here in Juneau. We have one in Ketchikan. There's one in Sitka. There's one in Anchorage, and then Fairbanks. And the home in Palmer is also the VA home, as well as the normal Pioneer home. And we have 3 levels of care. Our first level of care would be for people who need little to no assistance with activities of daily living. And then our level 2 care would be for those who need some help with like medication or, dressing, just, 2 to 3 of your activities of daily living. And then our level 3 would be for those who need help with most of your activities of daily living. We service those who are 65 and older. So once you turn 65, after you blow out your candles, you should come and fill out an application for the Pioneer Home. Our average age of residence is about 80 years old. We're seeing a lot of people who are waiting and staying in their homes longer rather than coming into one of our facilities. We have 2 wait lists, as I said, the inactive wait list and the active wait list. And the inactive wait list is, when you turn 65, you're eligible to sign up. And the biggest question I hear is, why would I sign up? I don't need it. I don't ever want to go. Well, it's the best and free insurance policy that you could ever get. Turn 65, you sign up, you don't have to go in, but it's a placeholder. Our waiting lists and how you get into the Pioneer Home are done by application date first and then level of care. So we don't prioritize someone's level of care for our waiting list. So you turn 65, and then in 20 years, when you're 85 and you need help, you can put your name on the active list to go into the Pioneer Homes. So first, I'll just say that our inactive list, we have about 5,000 people waiting on our active list. So our active list has about 400 people. So again, if you're saying, well, I don't need it and I'll just sign up when I'm ready, you have about 400 people waiting in line in front of you. So our active list, in order to go from inactive to active, you need to turn in a letter stating that I would like to go from inactive to active, and then you need a certificate of need, which talks about your activities of daily living, the things that you can do for yourself. And then you would need to turn in what's called a history and physical that needs to be signed by your doctor. And then once that's turned in, you send it in, and we put your name on the active list. There are a couple ways to pay for the Pioneer Homes. We do take private pay. We take long-term care, Medicaid, as well as the Medicaid waiver, and we do offer payment assistance. I would say, as far as the wait goes for people, for the 6 different homes, because all the homes are not the same across the board, we really try to cater to the communities right now. So some homes have a longer waiting list or others. So if people get, oh, how long is my wait? What number am I? We don't, because our waiting lists are by application date first, we don't give you a number. So if you call me today and you say, I signed up and I've been waiting 2 or 3 years, what number am I on, for instance, Juneau's list? I'm going to tell you, no matter what where your name really is, it's about a 6 month to 2 year wait. And that's because it really is by application date. So if I tell you that you were number 2 today, tomorrow you could be number 5, because our lists are so fluid. So we say about a 6 month to 2 year wait. Again, some homes like Sitka would be a shorter wait. Then there are homes like Juneau or Palmer who have a little bit of a longer wait. That's it. I'm sorry I talked so fast.
I have a question.
I do too.
Okay.
Since there's 400 or 500 people on a waiting list, is there any future expansion?
That was a great question that I cannot answer. It hasn't been talked about, but there are also other ways that we're trying to do things. We're trying to make more space actually in the homes, but that's not, building new homes is not something that is on the table.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about expanding onto the actual Pioneer homes, like another wing in Juneau because of the shortage.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the baby boomers coming up, and
yes,
it's
that's
going to
been talked about a lot.
There's a huge assisted living problem here in Juneau.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm sure it's going to get worse across the state as we all get older. So
just
wondering if there's any news at all that they would expand that or even go into other communities.
All I can say is it's been talked about. I can't say that that's definitely on the table right now, unfortunately. So, you have a question.
Are there any vacancies in any of the Pioneer homes?
Yes, there are vacancies, but and that's kind of how our lists get pulled, is when there is a vacancy, the different homes will call me and ask me for a list. I'm the gatekeeper, I guess as you'd say, for the list. So as soon as there is an opening, they call for a list and they start working that current list, because our home is driven by application date first. That's our promise saying, you did your due diligence to get your application in, so we're going to try to keep the list as current as possible, so that if we have an opening for you, then that's what we do. But there are openings.
And is it in the Sitka Pioneer home? Is that where
there's other openings too?
There are.
Homes. Yeah, there are.
And the openings, I'm with Pioneer Home as well. The openings are also dependent on the level of care.
Yes.
Right now, most of our vacancies are level 1, and most of our need is at level 3. And so, though there are vacancies, they can't be cross-applied to everyone on the wait list. And so, if you needed a level 1 room, that would be available right now in certain homes. But level 3, which is our highest need at the moment, we do not have vacancies.
And what she's saying, like they can't cross-apply, but there are a couple homes that take the first name on the list. So those homes have a little bit of a longer wait list, and that's because they're trying to say, okay, your application date is 1995, and you're up next. Okay, that's what we'll do. So just kind of, and that's also partly to do with the fact that each home is very, very unique.
Blaine, can we help restate what Jessica's saying so that our outside communities can also hear? They can hear better from where you're at with the speaker at this point. They may not be able to hear what her comments were.
Jessica was saying that because our rooms are set up by level of care, so there are openings, but if your application date, let's just say, is 1995 and you're level 1, most of our openings right now are a level 2 or level 3, so they have to bypass your name and look for someone who has a level 3 need. Not all the homes can just take the next person on the list. There are some homes that do, but not all homes can do that right now, currently with the way that they're set up.
Thank you, Blaine. We also have Pioneer Home applications on the back table. Blaine also has a...
Oh, yes, and you can also get all of the applications for the inactive and active waiting list online. I know that you put those back there.
So they're back here, and they're also in all the other libraries as well. Sharon.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon, and I'm from Wildflower Court. And Wildflower Court is a long-term care facility and a skilled nursing facility. And in order to get into Wildflower Court, you have to have a particular level of need or a level of care need, which is a little different than being in an assisted living home. So as far as skilled nursing goes, this is a care or a treatment that only a nurse can do. such as intravenous or intramuscular injections, Foley catheter insertions, patient teaching like about diabetes or CHF, chronic, what is CHF? Thank you. Congestive heart failure, and medication management, things like that. But they also do labs, radiology. Of course, that's done at the hospital here. They have social and educational activities, laundry services, and transportation, and end-of-life care. A lot of times, people who come into long-term care is because they aren't safe in the community anymore. They can meet that, they can be living in their homes and then just need that little extra care. So they'll come and apply at Wildflower or any long-term care facility. We also provide rehab services. We have a full staff, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and a speech therapist. So in long-term care, you're usually required to need help with most of your ADLs or medication management. We don't have an age limit. We do have younger folks in the facility as well as all the seniors. We also have a dementia care unit. It's a locked area, but they can come out. They're not locked all the time. Our payment sources, you can come in with Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance, and let me see what else. There are other facilities in the outlying areas, and pretty much they all, have the same payment source: Medicare, Medicaid, or private pay. Some of them have wait lists, and some of them don't. Let me just read over this real quick. And normally, to the application, what you really have to have is just that level of care. There is a paperwork that has to be filled out that gets turned into the state to determine whether or not you meet that level of care. Let me think, what else? Not much public speaking. Anyways, so if anybody has any questions, I can probably answer the questions as opposed to trying to tell you anything more. So, yes.
What is your wait list?
Right now I have about 60 people on my wait list, and it can range, as with the Pioneer Home, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years.
That was the same question.
Oh, okay, yeah. And even in the outlying areas, Wrangell doesn't have a wait list, nor does Cordova. And they are also smaller facilities and have less beds. So that's another thing. We have 57 beds in our facility. But anyways, anything else?
I was going to ask if you knew if you could name off the other places.
Yes. There's Cordova Community Medical Center, and I'm new to the area, so I don't even know where Cordova is. Oh, okay. There's Petersburg, Wrangell, Sitka, and Ketchikan. So they all have some sort of facility down there that will provide services.
We also have a list as well that's available in the back too, as well as in the other libraries too, of all of the different facilities that are located in this area.
Thank you.
So I had a question.
Sure.
So where do you get most of your referrals from?
When there are people in the hospital, if they need to come over to get skilled services like therapy in order to get strong, to get back into their homes, we work with the hospital. A lot of our referrals come from people in the community, seniors who have been living at home, families who have been taking care of them and just can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They've tried other services like home health, trying to get, that type of help, but it comes to the point where they can't manage their care anymore, and they'll start calling in for us.
So if someone needs immediate care and you can't provide that care to them? Will you refer them to one of the other homes, or like, do you have a good working relationship with the nursing homes?
I can, recommend that they call the other facilities in the outlying areas. A lot of people, because they're from Juneau, they don't want to have to go to a different area. Of course, if you go down south, there's always more, places you can go down there. So, it just depends. I always recommend, have you tried in-home care, anything before they have to go out of the community. Anybody else? Does anybody in the outlying areas have any questions?
Yeah.
All right, and I'm going to talk to you about the Medicaid waiver program that the state has, and also the PCA services that the state program has. And these two programs both, you have to be Medicaid eligible in order to be a part of these programs, which is where all the Miller Trust and all of those kind of things kind of came in this morning about people that are trying to get on these services. And the people that we look at and go and assess are basically people that are trying to stay out of Wildflower Court, and they want to stay home as long as they can. And so they're looking for services in order for them to do that at their home. And in order for the state to be asked to see these person, you have to have a care coordinator or a care coordinator for the Medicaid waiver to be assessed for it, or the agencies, PCA agencies have to turn in the application in order for us to look to see if they're eligible for PCA services. So this is not something that someone can call up the state and say, hey, I want somebody to come out and do that. So it kind of takes you the next step forward, because there are, these people know if these people will be able to apply for these services or not. Because sometimes they just want a little bit of help, and so they'll say, hey, I need a little bit of help. Well, the agencies and the care coordinators can tell them, well, yes, you meet these services or not, or let's apply and see, okay? And then that's where the nurses come in, that's where we come in. So once an application has been sent into the state with the Department of Senior Disabilities, then a nurse is assigned to come out and go out to that person's house. And what we're trying to look at is to see what their real needs are at their home. And a lot of times an incident will happen, an illness will happen, or something, and the person really needs help right then and there. And by the time they get their application in and we get there, oh, I'm already over that. So a lot of the times when people need help, it's a short-term thing. And so versus when you actually get there. Now some illnesses or some, if they've broken a hip or things like that, then that kind of extends out. So that's where we come in to see if they're safe in their home. So we go through, the state uses a tool called a consumer assessment tool. And it's a series of questions, 36 pages long. We ask a lot, it's across the board. But a lot of people talked about the activities of daily living. Well, what are the activities of daily living? Maybe most of you know. But what we look at is we look at people, if their bed mobility, can they move around in their bed? Are they going to lay in bed and have bed sores? Or can they change their position enough to where their skin integrity is intact? We look at how they get up and get down. Can they get up and down out of bed by themselves? Can they get up and down out of a chair by themselves? Or would they just sit there and not be able to move without someone helping them? So those are the kind of things that we look at for transfers. For locomotion, are they able to walk? If they have a walker and they have a cane and they're able to walk safely, that's something that we look at. If they can't even walk with a walker, or they can't walk with their cane and they need someone to hold on to them too, that's something that we look at. Dressing, if they're able to dress themselves. Are they able to feed themselves, physically put food in their mouth? Not necessarily cooking per se, but are they able to feed themselves? Because if someone can provide food for somebody and they can feed themselves, then they can get the nutrition that they need. We look at toileting, which is huge, because if you're soiled, then you're going to have a skin breakdown and you're going to need you're going to get sick. And so can the person get on and off the toilet by themselves? If they wear diapers or depends, can they change them? Can they make sure their skin integrity is clean? And then bathing, can they get into it and out of a shower? Can they get in and out of the bathtub? Can they keep themselves clean? So those are the kind of the activities of daily living that we look at, that are people, can they functionally do those things? So what happens is many times we get out to the person's home and functionally they can do all of those things. They can take a bath by themselves. They might want somebody in the other room in case they need help, but they can get in and out. They don't want anybody in there with them. They can dress themselves. They can feed themselves. They can do all the grooming that they need to do and all of those things. But all they really need, I need someone to clean my floor. I can't bend down anymore. I can't clean the bathroom like I want, and those kind of things. Well, both the PCA program that's set up is basically, and it says it in the flyer as well, is that if you have a functional disability and you're not functionally can't do those things, then this is what part of this program is. But if you can do all of those things, then maybe what you just need help with is what we call your instrumental of daily living activities. So that means your laundry, that means some housekeeping, that means some meal prep, maybe some help with grocery shopping and things like that. So those are the things that we look at when we go out. In order for you to meet the level of care for the Medicaid waiver program, you have to meet the level of care that if you didn't have those things put in place, you're going to Wildflower, okay? You need some skilled nursing needs, you need some rehabilitative therapies in order to get yourself back up and running. So many times what we'll do is we'll be asked to go out to look to see if they're eligible, if they meet that level of care for the waiver, but what we really find out is that they don't really meet that extensive care in those activities of daily living. They just need some limited assistance, and so they'll actually qualify for the PCA program versus the waiver program, to where they would meet the level of care where they need extensive assistance, someone to have to help them pick them up, someone has to help walk them, someone has to help get them to the toilet and clean them up, and those kind of things, okay? Cognitive, you asked that question a while ago, is part of the waiver program. There's a cognition part of it as well. So sometimes physically they're still able to do those things. If you had someone say, okay, now you need to put your shirt on, or now you need to do this, and cueing and supervision are required. And then people with dementia or Alzheimer's, sometimes there's different phases of it. So the beginning phases of dementia to the end phases are a wide variety. And so there's the way that we look at it, there's a form that we fill out as we go down to see what cognitively they're still able to do. Can they remember past things? Are they able to follow directions? Would they get lost in the house, or can they still get to their room and back, and those kind of things. So not everyone that has dementia meets the waiver criteria. And a lot of times we'll get that, is that, oh, well, they have dementia. Well, yeah, but when you go, they can still remember this and this and this. And so you just have to remember there's different phases of the dementia that we have to look at. And they have to be pretty far on the scale this way in order to qualify just for cognition, for the waiver program. What does the waiver program do? So basically, and I think there's a thing back there too. So when you meet the waiver criteria, you've got Medicaid. You kind of look at it as one umbrella over here, and then you have the Medicaid waiver over here. And so with the waiver program, it can provide chore for people that need the help with the shopping and the laundry and those things. A lot of times you'll get on waiver and you'll have a spouse. Well, it's the spouse's responsibility to do those things, but we could provide respite services. That's one of the part of the waiver. And so you can go in the house and relieve that spouse so she can get off, and someone will be in the house so she doesn't have to worry. There's transportation, adult day services, the care coordination, of course. Sometimes environmental modifications that have to be done in the house, if it's modifying a bathroom or getting grab bars in or getting an elevated toilet or some of those things the waiver will pay for. The other thing that sometimes people think is once you're on the waiver, will you stay on the waiver forever? Well, that's not true in some cases. In some cases it is, but in some cases it's not. So if, let's say for some instance somebody broke their hip and so they're back at home but they can't get up yet, they can't do those things, they get on the waiver. Well, we go out a year later, well, they're up and walking now, they're back and doing all the things that they were doing before they got the hip done, and so basically what happens is you come off the waiver. The waiver basically got you through your recovery period and your phases, and if you've recovered appropriately, then you no longer get those services. So, any questions? That's a lot of information.
But how long does it take from once you receive the application until a nurse is able to go out and do the assessment?
Once you've submitted a full application, so what happens is sometimes applications get sent in and it's not complete, and then you'll get a call or you'll get an email saying we need this, we need this, we need this. But once we've received a full application, we are supposed to have 30 days in order to get a nurse to that assessment. So, and 30 working days, not through the weekends.
How long does it take you to do an assessment?
It takes us about an hour to an hour and a half once we get out to the home and go through. What we really like to do is have the client themselves answer the questions, and lots of times you'll get a lot of family activity because, hey, I need them to come in here and do this and this. And usually, especially with dementia people, we like for them to answer the questions, and then we kind of go back and, the family, well, he said he could do this, but he doesn't, so we kind of take into consideration both of those things. But it usually takes anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. If it's a reassessment, it's after a year they've been on the program and we go back out, I know you, what's been changing, well, I'm doing this now and this now and this now. Then sometimes it'll take like 45 minutes or something. And then some of them take 2 hours. It just depends on how much they want to talk. And, it's, the way we look at it is this is their hour. This is their time to let us know the things that they need. And primarily for the state, we want them to be in a safe environment. So it's not like we want to, are they going to be safe in their home? And there's many times where people want to stay in their home, and you get there and you're looking at them and you're assessing them and you're looking at the care coordinator saying, there is no way we can get enough people in here or time in here for them to be safe where they are. And they know that as well, but sometimes it just takes that extra person that doesn't know them saying that as well.
So is it the same group of nurses that assesses for PCA Medicaid that assesses for the Medicaid choice waiver?
There's a registered nurse that does both. You have to be a registered nurse in order to do for the Medicaid waiver. PCA, I believe now, and I'm not for sure, but some of us are RNs that do PCA waivers. Like I cover Southeast, so I see both waiver and PCA. I think up in the Anchorage area, it's different because they have nurses that are not nurses, but people that have been trained in order to do the PCA assessments. So I think and I may be wrong. So in Southeast, it's a nurse that does both. The process is the same. Yes, exactly. We do the same. We use the same tool, the consumer assessment tool. And there's some brochures back there on this too. The same questions for PCA as for waiver.
You said that the client has Medicaid eligible at the get-go in order to even apply. So there's an economic issue, very threshold.
There is, but on some circumstances when people, like Ollie was talking this morning about the Miller's Trust and getting people down, if they're in a unsafe environment and they're trying to get things rolling, then what they will do is say, okay, we're applying for Medicaid. What they usually do, we'll see, do they make the waiver or not? If they don't make the waiver, then I don't know if they go the next step or not. Or if they make the waiver, then they keep going in the process.
are you ever gonna try and close that 30-day gap, or, I mean, it just seems like a real long time for some of these people out there that need the service sooner.
There is, and there is, some applications can be expedited, and but they have to be in an unsafe place. If they are in a safe place, then we're not going to expedite. It's only, and then you have 48 hours to get to them. But if they have people around or whatever, that are around and safe, and there's a nurse back in Anchorage that talks to people and figures out whether we can expedite it or not. The state is behind. I mean, we're behind on our assessments across the board. So, I mean, I just did an assessment that should have been done at a year that was close to almost 2. So, you know, just up in Anchorage. So, you know, it just, until we get full staffed and stay full staffed, I just don't see that closing. Oh, they hire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, they hire, and then, yeah. So.
When you request an expedite, the state has 48 hours to respond before they come out and do an assessment. It's actually.
Is that what it is?
I'm asking you.
Oh, what I've heard was, and I don't know all of that, but what I've heard is if they call and they say, we want you to expedite this, then someone looks at that right away. If it looks like it needs to be expedited, then they call us and say, we need to get you over there, period. So then I've heard we have 48 hours. So.
Because I'm on 72.
Are you on 72?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you talk to anybody at the?
No, you have to fill out the expedite form and wait for the nurse to put it in writing.
Or you can always call and bug.
I will.
Yeah. All right, any other questions for me? Anything out in the community?
So I had a question. As far as the nurse assessors coordinating with adult protective services, with some people that don't have a lot of visitors in their home, how often do you go into the home and see issues that make you need to call Tanya? How regular is that?
We go out once a year once they're on the program. So that's not really our job once we see it. Or, you know, if we see it on an initial assessment or when we see it when we go out. But PCA agencies and care coordinators are there on a monthly basis. So if there is an issue, they should be doing the APS reports. They're what is it? Mandatory. They're mandatory reporters. So yeah. But we just go out once a year. But you know, like I did an initial in Anchorage, and it was red flags all over, and I, you know, filled out an APS report right then and there. So yeah.
Do you have a bottleneck with getting care coordinators? Are there enough of them for the client base?
Well, there's quite a few care coordinator. There's a care coordinator list. So you know, I know in Southeast, I don't think they would have any trouble finding a care coordinator. Maybe in the Anchorage area, where we have an influx, but I think they have an influx of care coordinators there as well. So, and there's a list of care coordinators and services back there.
The local list as well as the statewide list that's available on the back table.
Okay.
All right, all yours.
Okay.
Thank you, Ashley.
Well, I'm Barbara, and I'm going to talk about general relief. And I don't have very good information on general relief, I'm sorry to say. General relief was a program that started as an emergency service, and it was emergency funds that helped APS pay for the people that maybe were abused in their homes or were neglecting themselves to the point where it was so unsafe that they had to physically move from their home. We could pay for that at 100%, remove them from that place. They would come with us and help pay for the assisted living home. That's the way it was originally designed. Now it is that, there's two parts to it. It is still that, and then there is people that do need general relief assistance because they haven't really met the criteria for assisted living, for Medicaid yet, maybe homeless and had an accident or something along those lines. maybe doesn't have any income yet, but there still has to be some eligibility requirements to it. So they have to be disabled in some way, where those ADLs that everybody keeps talking about, they can't do those, they can't protect themselves. There has to be some sort of disabling condition, severe mental illness that stops them from protecting themselves or taking care of themselves. That would come into play. There is some income requirements. Really what the income requirements is that if you have any income, the state asks that you pay at all of your income to that, less $100. So if you had $500, you would pay $400 to the state. The state would pay for the rest of that bill for the assisted living home, and you get to keep $100. Now, because General Relief is a short-term service, the intent is that then you would go back to your home, or things would become safer, you would get healthier, and you wouldn't have to use that anymore, and then your income would go back to you. On an average, assisted living homes run about $5,000 a month. Some run less than that, some are more. So we're looking at a huge out-of-pocket expense, not only for that person, but for the state as well. That's a program that's only funded by General Relief funds. So there's no Medicaid, there's no Medicare, it's just that. It's a fund that's very, very over budget, has been over budget. I've been with APS for 8 years. It's always been like that. There isn't any real age requirement or anything like that. It is, because we work with adults. But we have to receive the reports from either a care coordinator, a case manager, a professional of some kind to make that report to us. A lot of times they come from the hospital. Hospital discharge planners say this person needs to broke their hip, they need to go to an assisted living home because they can't take care of themselves at this point. So they send us the paperwork within General Relief. We do our application. Then we find out kind of where they're at as far as their money. Then they can go and stay in this assisted living home, and that discharge planner kind of helps them out with that. But then they start the process with getting with a care coordinator, trying to get on those long-term services so that General Relief kind of pulls out, and then those funds, that should be paying for it, then pays for that. I think somebody had mentioned about care coordinators. Usually those applications are coming, like I said, from discharge planners or care coordinators or case managers of some sort. APS can also do those applications when we have a report of harm, we have an issue that somebody comes and says we have to, this is something wrong, we've substantiated some sort of abuse or neglect or whatever. But on care coordinators would fill out the application and then help that person try and get on the waiver at that time. Chances are very good that they probably meet, somebody had said that they know the criteria, so they're going to have a good idea if that person's going to meet that level of care for these programs that we're talking about. But one of the issues with that is that a care coordinator doesn't actually get paid until they meet waiver. General Relief does not pay for care coordination services or case management services. It is straight room and board, and that's all it is. It's a very fast process for General Relief, so there really isn't a wait list or anything like that. It is because it is an emergency basis. So if somebody needs to come out, a very fast assessment is done. A lot of it's just paperwork. Sometimes, especially on APS end, sometimes it is that fast. Okay, we go out there, we assess them, we see what kind of vulnerabilities that person has, we approve it right then and there. Then we're going to work on their money and find out where they're at, and so sometimes we have to pay the whole thing until we know what kind of situation is going on with this person. And then we assist them with getting on waivers or whatever we need. There isn't one home here, and correct me, but there is not one home here in Juneau that accepts General Relief. In your area, you have one in Ketchikan, one in Wrangell. You do not have one in Petersburg, but there is an assisted living home there, and you do not have one in Haines. You have one in Haines, but they do not take General Relief. And that's why I said that there's not my portion's kind of grim, because one of the topics of this is placement problems. This is a placement problem because we don't have the places to place in this area. So a lot of times people from your area do have to get transported to Anchorage or to the valley, Matsu Valley, Kenai, those type of places. Any questions on general relief? Yes, ma'am.
Barbara, what percentage of people on general relief statewide would you say kind of endlessly cycle through that 90 days? Like it's 90 days and they don't have another form of payment, so then they get another 90 days?
It's big.
Like 2 years later,
yeah.
they're still on that 90
There are
day.
some that have been on there 2, 3, 4 years. It wasn't designed that way, though.
So what do you do?
Well, we don't really kick them off. We are actively looking at revamping this whole process, this whole thing. So you're going to start seeing more very critiqued applications. Very, maybe the guidelines are going to get changed. I know that they are rewriting the regs to kind of narrow that scope. But we don't. I mean, if somebody's at risk, we're going to still have to give them that service, at least at this point. And then try and work with our partners and try and get them on some sort of service. But I think what's happened is that sometimes it became a housing program. And so because it didn't have somebody in there that helped them, kind of get out of that, it kind of just became well, this is where I live now type of thing. And they really didn't meet that criteria anymore. And so people who maybe needed that service, the house was full or whatever, and you have somebody that really could probably take care of themselves but just needed some extra help, needed somebody to help them figure out which application I need to fill out, how do I do my food stamp stuff, how do I do my, how do I get a case manager because my mental illness is kind of getting in the way of me doing that kind of stuff. So that's what we're kind of looking at now. But it is a huge percentage. There is a lot that's on. I mean, I think, I want to say there's like 400 and something people, I think, on general relief. I could be wrong. There are also 400 and something assisted living homes in Anchorage. I mean, in the state. I mean, it's a huge list. So, any other questions?
I just want to add a couple of comments. So, general relief is, as Barbara says, an emergency program, but one of the things that it doesn't cover for Southeast Alaska, and one of the planning ahead type things to be aware of, is that it does not cover the cost to travel. So if, again, we have the Manor in Ketchikan, and we have the Berge House in Wrangell, and if somebody needs assisted living, and they need to be transported someplace else, that cost to be transported is not going to be covered under the general relief. So that's something that comes from families, friends, out of the pockets, out of themselves. In many of those cases, we hope that, in this area that we're transporting after an acute stay at the hospital and the person has Medicaid, or we can have them eligible for Medicaid, so that Medicaid will help with the transport costs for a continuum of care and further treatment. So it's something as people think about, I want my loved ones coming home, or they need to have additional care, we have to be wise about how we plan some of these services, or being able to be willing to accept what we may have as kind of stepping stones. So an example of that in this area, I oftentimes have family meetings and have to do some planning while somebody's in acute care. And oftentimes folks end up in Anchorage because of extended needs for their acute care. And they don't have services set up here in Southeast Alaska. And the family says, well, we need to bring them home, and we need to bring them home now. And there's no question. And then you say, well, wait a minute here. It's going to take several months to be able to get all the pieces in place to be able to try to put together a good, solid plan to bring them home. And so something as planning ahead kind of brings into that factor is thinking ahead about, okay, are we willing to accept what might be in Anchorage, or willing to accept what might be in Wasilla? Or if I'm getting to a point where I'm not able to care for myself as well, are there other places that I might consider? So something to really be aware of with some of that pre-planning is, helping figure out Medicaid, helping be able to get a hold of the Pioneer Home, getting that application in getting it early, even if you don't need it, going on that inactive wait list, being able to see, do I qualify for PCA services or, would I qualify for a Medicaid waiver? Because general relief is
general relief is not a planning tool.
It fills the gap for a crisis, but it can be a challenge here in Southeast. So we do have it, but
it's only an emergency, and I am pretty certain that as they start, really working on this tightening up of the eligibility stuff, it's gonna be really even stricter probably. So there is still, rest assured, there's still going to be emergency funds if there is an emergency. And then it might be, we're only going to approve it for such and such time.
So just a note with the assisted living homes that we do have here in Southeast Alaska, we have a beautiful facility in Haines as well as another one in Petersburg, both of which are paid for by Medicaid waiver or by private pay only. There is a private paid non-licensed home that's here in Juneau that has about 2 or 3 people at a time. It's Helping Hands and Healing Hearts, but it's again, it's private pay, so you're looking at it's about 2 people. So it's about $7,000 a month. So that cost is a high cost when you're looking at what placement options you have as compared to the Pioneer Home. And some pre-planning that could be done with the Pioneer Home and some of the different programs that they offer for payment assistance and such as well. So again, some of that pre-planning and trying to keep folks home is trying to find a balance with pre-planning with the Pioneer Home for potential long-term stuff, but also looking at how our in-home care services might be able to assist to hopefully avoid having to use some of our emergency systems and then having to be placed outside.
And general relief doesn't pay what waivers pay. General relief only pays about $70 a day, which on an average comes out to be about $2,500 a month for the assisted living home, and then the state takes the rest of that, pays the rest of that. So there is some abilities to get extra money if there's some behavioral or medical issues while we're trying to get that person on public assistance or what have you, then so it can go up to about $90. But it's for a big huge budget or lack of budget, it doesn't pay very much, and so that's another issue with placement is that homes don't want to accept general relief because it doesn't pay as much. Yeah.
So if somebody is in general relief and they've been in there for a while, whose responsibility is it, or who helps them to get out of this?
Well, that's the issue. There isn't anybody.
Okay.
And some of them have case management through whoever, and we'd like to think that they would help with that, but they really that's been some of the problem is that there hasn't been any, because APS aren't case managers, so we wouldn't do that. And there isn't a case management service that does that so much. So it's really up to that person to do it. Families will help. Some people do move in and out very fast, and that's all they do, and they get in there, and that's all they need, and they're out. But yeah, that's part of the problem is that there isn't anybody to help them follow through.
Also,
I'm sorry?
The homes are motivated also to get someone off general relief because it increases significantly the amount of money they get.
Yeah, and some good homes. And don't get me wrong, not all the homes are bad. They're very, very good homes. And some of the homes do help out and do some great case management and help out their clients through the whole process. And then they stay in that home because they can stay there permanently. So it makes sense for them to do that. Some homes don't. And there are homes that just do general relief, won't do anything else. So it's very transient. So they'll move people in, move people out. That's all they do. Any other questions? Okay.
Any questions from the outside communities at this point?
Well, I wanted to thank these ladies for participating today, and be able to take a minute to thank all of you for coming and joining us at the resource fair and making it a great success. I get yours. Okay, because I complained, right? Wait. You're not leaving yet. Okay, well, you give that to Lori. All right. You did a fabulous job. That's okay. Went out in my head. That's all right. I had one this morning too.